you're here. So glad you are here. Trying to get the pillow behind me straight so it's not like a big, arc. This is weird. I've got like a triangle over my shoulder or something. What the hell is this? Oh, well, we know BreadTube will say it's a secret fascist code sign, right? It's a secret fascist code sign, right? All right, there you go. Now there is a blue pillow behind me that doesn't have a giant arc. So there you go. Welcome everybody. Glad you're here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Remember to post this on Reddit, post this on Twitter, post this on Facebook, post this on social media, post this everywhere that videos are posted. Bring a crowd. It's Saturday evening. It is just after 10 p.m. here. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Hopefully someday we'll have the bookshelf back, but as of now, I'm in the bedroom, sitting here with a pillow up against the wall. And it's a good time. I've got a few things I want to talk to you all about tonight. I've got my opening remarks, then we do the roll call, where I call you all out, names and locations, call you out as I see you. Then from there, I answer your super chat questions, and we can do that all night long. You keep sending the questions, and I keep answering them. And I've got plenty of unnamed water beverage. It is now summertime, by the way, in Brooklyn. It is summertime. Unnamed water beverage. There was ice in it 2 minutes ago, but not no more. And got a whole bunch of it, and we're going to sit here and talk politics and engage with each other and try to get that feeling of oneness and comradeship that is so essential to trying to build a new world. Good times, folks. Glad to have the opportunity to engage with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, yeah, let's jump on into it. As you send your super chats, I'll be writing them down in the notebook here, and then from there, I'll be answering them in the second half of the show. So why don't we just jump into my opening remarks? Just jump right into my opening remarks. I'm not really going to say much about Israel-Palestine. We know there's a ceasefire that has just occurred. There are celebrations of that ceasefire going on. There's a lot of tension in Israel itself between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. There was a lot of violence on the streets in addition to the armed conflict that recently happened. We have the Democratic Party and the liberals and the progressives more and more turning anti-Israel. We have Joe Biden still, maintaining the pro-Israeli stance. All of that's going on. I wanted to also mention that the elections in Iran are approaching, and the Rouhani administration is very nervous because it appears that Ahmadinejad is very popular. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is very popular. And the Rouhani administration's promises that, they were going to negotiate with Barack Obama and John Kerry, and they were going to sign a nuclear deal, and that was going to make everything A-OK in Iran. Well, that didn't work out too well. Now, did it? Qasem Soleimani is dead. The Iranian economy is wrecked. And it looks like there's a very, very good chance that the reformist government of Rouhani will be on the outs. And that a hardliner government in Iran, a hardliner or a principalist government in Iran could be back into power. Now, we'll see who the Guardian Council approves and does not approve. But it looks like Iranian politics could be shifting very rapidly. Wanted to mention a couple other things. So I don't know if people saw this, but I get on here and I talk about synthetic left and how much they annoy me and how much I can't stand them. Okay, folks, global warming is a fact. I do not deny global warming. I do not deny climate change. I don't deny any of that. I don't play that game, right? NYC mayor race, right? Very good question. I don't play any of that. I really don't play any of that. I don't play that game, right? I mean, I can see the weather patterns. Things are changing. Things are really changing. There's definitely change going on. Okay. Had to get a new pen there because my pen wasn't working. Okay. NYC mayor race crime and Ron Karenga versus Black Panthers. Wrote it down. But if you're concerned about climate change, if you're concerned about climate change, you should be jumping for joy about Russia and China right now, because it's not getting anywhere near the proper amount of coverage. But right now, China has a project they call the artificial sun, or the man-made sun, where they are beginning the process of extracting uranium for nuclear power from seawater. I mean, this is amazing. So, you know, nuclear power, it requires this device called a nuclear reactor. It requires a substance known as uranium. And there is lots of uranium in the seawater. And if you take uranium out of the seawater, it's still seawater. It's not like it doesn't damage the seawater in any way to remove the uranium. So China is in the process of setting up this whole apparatus that will start extracting uranium from seawater. And they are building these huge nuclear power plants, right? And Putin is on board. Putin and Russia are part of the project. It's very, very, very exciting. Okay, Nord Stream 2. Very, very exciting. And this is the answer to climate change. This plus nuclear fusion, nuclear fission. I mean, this is the answer. Okay? This is the answer, right? I mean, the fact that China is pushing the artificial sun, right? Getting China off of fossil fuels, lifting the dependency of the world on fossil fuels, advancing technology. China is advancing their space program right now. China understands, yes, climate change is a reality. We don't just need development, we need sustainable development. We need to use our resources in a rational and sustainable way. That is absolutely true. We cannot operate in a way where we just run out of resources, etc. We need to think long-term and strategically. They're right about that. So while China is like moving ahead and saying, okay, we're going to pour lots of government money into scientific research, we are gonna figure out how to extract uranium from seawater. We are going to launch spacecraft onto the moon. We are gonna extract helium-3 from the moon. We are gonna train scientists. We're gonna take people who grew up in rural villages and give them college education so they grow up to be scientists and engineers that make great breakthroughs for the nation. We are gonna have a national agenda of defeating dependency on fossil fuels and all of that. We're not gonna let the free market control the sciences and have all our smart people working on Wall Street and figuring out how to manipulate, rip off derivative schemes or something. We're actually gonna put our smart people to work building a better country. That's what they're doing. Meanwhile, anti-communist conspiracy theories. Okay. Meanwhile, Amsterdam has decided that the way that they're going to fight climate change is they are making laws now to prohibit advertisements for cheap flights and for cars that they consider to not be fuel efficient. Right? So if you are trying to go from Amsterdam to the Olympics in Japan, you want to book a flight to do that, don't expect to see advertisements for any flight deals up, because airplanes use too many fossil fuels. You're a bad person. You're a bad person if you fly from Amsterdam to Japan for the Olympics. You're using too much energy, and you got to stop that. Right? What they do is cigarettes, right? And cigarettes, okay, yes, cigarettes cause cancer, and all that. Cigarettes cause cancer. We don't want kids smoking, seeing ads, thinking cigarettes are cool, right? Yeah, I get it. But no, now they've decided that cheap flights are the equivalent of cigarettes. They're going to outlaw advertising of cheap flights. They're going to outlaw advertisements for cars that they consider to be not fuel efficient. And this is the whole thing the capitalists are doing, where it's not the fault of capitalism, it's not the irrational profit motive, it's those bad working people who want to go to the Olympics with their kids. How dare they destroy the earth? My goodness, if we could just ban all working class people from getting on a plane and going to the Olympics, of course, we can fly to our global international conferences to discuss why we need fuel restrictions. But gosh darn it, those poor working people, my goodness, they think that they can fly to the Olympics in Japan. Well, we're gonna outlaw those ads. We're gonna morally shame them. We got Greta Thunberg. Remember Greta Thunberg, right? Greta Thunberg she is now, she got up at the UN and said, how dare you? How dare you? Economic growth, how dare you? We can't have economic growth, how dare you? Economic growth is just awful, awful. Relations, Israel, just, somehow we're just going to stop climate change by rolling back the wheels of history and by finger pointing and shaming working people and forcing everyone to have less and rolling back the wheels of history. And we're going to set up a bunch of windmills. Do you know that? We're going to set up a bunch of windmills. If we just set up enough windmills, that'll solve it. Now, little known fact, in order to keep the wind turbines going, they never tell you this, but, wind turbines, right? Folks, you may not be aware of this, but the wind does not blow at high speeds 24 hours a day. There are times where there is not any wind. So how do they keep those turbines rolling? They have this thing called a gas generator. What does the gas generator use? Fossil fuels. Give me a break. Give me a break. Oh my goodness. I mean, China has the answer, right? Russia is on board with them as well. They understand that fossil fuels is a trap for humanity. It's how big bankers and big oil monopolists dominate the global economy, is by keeping us all dependent on oil. And fossil fuels is not sustainable. We cannot continue to operate this way. It's destroying the environment. We need to get to a higher energy source. But we can't do that because then the Western capitalists won't rule the world. We can't. The Western capitalists won't rule the world, right? If China can lead the world with nuclear fusion and the artificial sun, no, we can't do that. So basically, human history and human progress must end so that Wall Street oil bankers and London Stock Exchange monopolists and the Royal Dutch Shell and the HSBC Bank and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the DuPonts can sit at the top of the global economy. That's basically the situation we're in here. Human history must end. Human history must end. Everyone must have less. We have to degrow everything because we need Western capitalism to stay in power. The solution to climate change is progress. Humans solve problems by inventing new things, by building things, by creating things. That's how humans solve problems. This is ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. Imagine, when hunter-gatherer civilization, right? Hunter-gatherer civilization, it started to be outmoded. We invented spears and sticks and rocks. We were way too good at killing animals. Way too good at killing animals. So human beings had the great idea of starting to grow their own food, starting to domesticate animals. And it worked. And we had the first social revolution. We got to a higher mode of production, agriculture. But what these people want to do is they say, oh, no. They would have said, we have this problem, is that we got our sticks and our rocks and we're way good at killing animals and we've paid attention to growing plants and how they grow and where the vegetation is. And now there's a scarcity, but we can't move to a higher source, God forbid. No, because then, the chief of our tribe might not be the chief anymore. And, we can't do that. I know. We'll just kill half of our tribe, and then we'll all eat less. Brilliant, right? And we'll eat half of what we eat, and we'll kill half of our tribe, and that way there won't be a shortage of food because that's what they're talking about here. They cannot comprehend that history keeps marching forward. Time doesn't move backward, folks. H.G. Wells, he was a great writer, wrote great science fiction. The Time Machine is a great book. I love the book. It's a great book, H.G. Wells. I got into an argument about it with my family. I'll tell you about that in a minute. It's a great book, but it's fiction. Time does not move backwards, as far as we know. Nobody wants to work, all right? Wants to work, all right. What else? Does China not promote socialism outside of its borders? All right. China not promote socialism outside its borders. All righty. So this is the situation. This is the situation that we've got here. Now, it's interesting because if you read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, you don't watch the movies of it. I mean, some of the older movies might be a little more accurate, but the most recent movie has nothing to do, very little to do with what H.G. Wells wrote. It's basically the butterfly effect. Posner. All right. It's basically the butterfly effect. But H.G. Wells, he wrote this book called The Time Machine. And basically, the concept of the book, The Time Machine, is that, this guy builds a time machine, and he goes into the future. The time machine gets broken. He's stuck in the future. He needs to fix the time machine so he can go back to the time where he originated. But in the future that he lives, the working class, the factory workers, and the capitalists have evolved into two different species. That's the premise of the book. The working class have evolved into these like big scary monsters who live underground and have technology. And the capitalists have evolved into these little like short people that are like meek and like walk around going and are very like quiet and meek and live above the ground and are like spacey and don't think. What super chats did I miss here? I got Posner was the last one. I got China not promoting socialism. I got nobody wants to work. What other super chats am I missing here? What am I missing here? Nobody wants to work. Is there any others I missed? China's relationship with Israel. I think I got them all. I think that's it, right? All right, but anyway, that's the premise of The Time Machine. It's H.G. Wells writing the idea that the industrial proletariat and the industrial bourgeoisie, the new leisure class of capitalists who do not work and just what do they call them? Idlers, like the idle rich, the idlers who just spend their days living and and all of that, and the hardworking industrial capitalists. Cancel culture, cancel itself. Right? That they evolve into two different species. That's the premise of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. That's what it's about, right? And it's like a warning of and that's a lot of things. And I understand the conspiracy crowd is really into H.G. Wells right now. H.G. Wells, because he was a Fabian. And because he did a great interview with Stalin. You can read the interview that H.G. Wells did with Stalin. He really knows how to get Stalin talking. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Here, I.O. Hillary will make you a mod, I think. All right. But he really knows how to get Stalin talking. But there's a lot of the conspiracy folks are talking about H.G. Wells nowadays. But the answer is technological progress. Now, I wanted to talk about another thing, because I've told you all I'm writing this book about BreadTube, and I'm finalizing it. I'm going over the BreadTube book. I'm finishing it, but I realized as I was writing, I wrote a draft of it, and then I rewrote it, and then I rewrote it, and as I rewrote it, I realized that probably the most important concept that is missing in the BreadTube perspective is imperialism. Look, the concept of imperialism, the Leninist understanding of imperialism, is the most important thing to understand if you are a communist in our time. Thank you, Andre. If you are a communist in our time, you absolutely must understand the Leninist concept of imperialism. If you do not understand that, you got nothing. You've got nothing, okay? You can talk about pencil factories all day long. You can talk about how in the pencil factory, the evil pencil capitalist steals the surplus value from the happy, jolly pencil worker. You can talk about how great the pencil factory would be if everybody owned the pencils together in common. You can talk about the falling rate of profit and how the capitalist in the pencil factory is constantly driving to churn out more pencils as efficiently as possible, and that leads to replacing workers with machines. You can talk about how there used to be craftsman pencils who made the pencils on their own and put their soul into the pencil, and now they just churn them out as dull pieces on the assembly line. You can talk about how the pencil worker is alienated from his pencil labor and how he is merely an appendage to the pencil making machines. You can talk about all this classical Marxism all day long. You can talk about pencil factories and pencil prices and pencil surplus value and pencil exploitation and pencil profits and the general law of capitalist pencil maker accumulation and competition between pencil companies. You can talk about this all day long. But if you don't understand the Leninist concept of imperialism, if you do not understand the Leninist concept of imperialism, that's not worth very much. To be an anti-imperialist in our time is to be a socialist, and to not be an anti-imperialist means you are not a socialist. Socialism in our time is anti-imperialism, and imperialism in our time is capitalism. Anti-imperialism is anti-capitalism. Anti-capitalism is anti-imperialism. And if you are not an anti-imperialist, you are not a socialist. Imperialism is the decisive issue in our time. And the bread tube crowd that are smoking some Peter Kropotkin joint, they're smoking some crazy Peter Kropotkin weed, and they don't understand imperialism. And I have realized that I am an anti-imperialist, and to be a socialist in our time is to be an anti-imperialist. All the anti-imperialist countries have been forced to move towards socialism, and all the imperialist countries can talk about social democracy and welfare states and all that, but as long as they're part of the global imperialist apparatus, they're still capitalist. Anti-imperialism is socialism. Socialism is anti-imperialism. And that's why I've put out this book. We put out the CPI manual. The CPI, the Center for Political Innovation, is an anti-imperialist think tank, and that is what it means to be a socialist in our time. USA does not owe China, nor does it need to borrow from China. This is a myth. Okay. Right. USA borrowing China. Myth. Folks, you need to understand imperialism. You absolutely need to understand imperialism. And in this book, there is a section, more than a section, but there is a section where I go over the Leninist understanding of imperialism and its origins, where it came from. And I am going to quickly read that section to you. And we're going to talk about what it means and why it is relevant to what we're talking about. So here we go. This is Imperialism and the Crisis of Marxism, section 116. China does not get interest on dollars on goods. Okay, very good. All right. This is the important stuff. If you don't have this, you're not really a Marxist. You're not really an anti-imperialist if you don't understand what I'm about to read to you. It is vitally important. It is vitally, vitally important. Vitally, vitally important. I think there's a super chat that went by. Previously said USSR. All right. Okay. USSR required market reforms. What would have looked like? All right, wrote it down. All right. Page 19, section 116. The Marxist movement proliferated across Europe, most especially after the death of its founding prophet in 1883. The Socialist International, or the Second International, emerged as a continent-wide mass movement, with the German Social Democratic Party as its flagship organization. Okay. Millions of working-class people joined Marxist, labor, and social democratic parties. Unions fought for the rights of factory workers, universal male suffrage, restriction on the length of the workday, and union representation on the job was established in many parts of Europe. Socialist deputies were elected to many parliaments. Marx's writings were broadly distributed, and institutes of Marxist studies were established. The United States was not left out of the rise in socialist consciousness. Activist Edward Bellamy's science fiction novel, Looking Backward, was published in 1888. The text told of a beautiful, futuristic USA in which the rule of profits had been eliminated and human beings lived in comfort and cooperation. The book created a sensation across the USA as a bestseller. People inspired by the novel formed nationalist clubs to promote the vision Bellamy's narrative presented. Among those who promoted his socialist vision was Edward Bellamy's cousin, Francis Bellamy. Francis Bellamy was a Baptist minister who later composed the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. Daniel De Leon's Socialist Labor Party of America, and eventually the much larger Socialist Party of America, led by Eugene Debs, began to spread the Marxist gospel of social revolution and rational economics across the American heartland. Debs traveled in a red train car from city to city, calling for the working class to take its place as the masters of U.S. society. Upton Sinclair, Ida Tarbell, John Reed, Lincoln Steffens, and other socialist journalists exposed the crimes of the rich and powerful. The industrial workers of the world organized the desperately low-income and immigrant trade and industrial workers who were rejected by the American Federation of Labor for being unskilled. In the first decade of the 20th century, Marxism was everywhere in the Western world, and the working class was more organized than ever before. Yet, socialist revolutions did not occur. Scholars began to write about the crisis of Marxism because it seemed that while Marx's ideas had widely proliferated, they did not manifest themselves in the predicted proletarian revolution that they were intended to create. The crisis of Marxism and the lack of revolutions and uprisings occurred because the global economy was changing. Factory owners were being usurped by bankers. As international corporations based in Western capitals spread themselves across the world, the living standards for some strata in the homelands were rising. Writing from Russia, Lenin described this new global order as imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Lenin wrote, "Imperialism is a specific historical stage of capitalism. Its specific character is threefold. Imperialism is monopoly capitalism, parasitic or decaying capitalism, and moribund capitalism. The supplanting of free competition by monopoly is the fundamental economic feature, the quintessence of imperialism. Monopoly manifests itself in 5 principal forms. 1, cartels, syndicates, and trusts. The concentration of production has reached a degree which gives rise to these monopolistic associations of capitalists. 2, the monopolistic position of the big banks. 3 or 4 giant banks manipulate whole economic life of America, France, and Germany. 3, seizure of the sources of raw materials by the trusts and the financial oligarchy. Finance capital is monopoly, industrial capital merged with bank capital. 4, the economic partition of the world by the international cartels has begun. There are already over 100 such international cartels, which command the entire world market and divide it amicably among themselves until war redivides it. The export of capital, as distinct from the export of commodities under non-monopolistic capitalism, is a highly characteristic phenomenon and is closely linked with economic and territorial partition of the world. 5. The territorial partition of the world into colonies is completed. All right, Lenin versus Rosa. All right. The rise of the international market led to bankers supplanting factory owners, with industry depending on credit and lending in order to function. Unlike industrialists, bankers have a fundamentally anti-progressive historical position in relation to the world. For example, figures like Henry Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and Henry Ford ultimately sought to see the living standards in the United States increased. They viewed their own profits as rising alongside advances in technology and scientific progress. The various captains of industry could be ruthless in breaking strikes and crushing those who challenged their power and profits, but they still built libraries, financed public works, and on some level believed that their own advancement accompanied the advancement of the country and of human civilization. The financial elite of creditors that usurped the factory owners had come to rule the world in the monopolistic associations that Lenin described, and had a completely different relationship with the world and with humanity itself. This current represents nothing more than a financial middleman accumulating its position and making profits through the lending of money, not production. In his time, Marx described the rise of what he called fictitious capital, writing, "To the extent that the depreciation or increase in value of this paper is independent of the movement of value of the actual capital that it represents, the wealth of the nation is just as great before as after its depreciation or increase in value." The imperialists maintained their super profits by super exploiting countries across the developing world. In order for Wall Street and London to maintain their position as monopolistic rulers of the global market, it was necessary to tear down any level of development that was taking place across the developing world. Great nations had to be reduced to the level of captive client states. The world had to be kept poor so that Wall Street and London could be made rich. The financialization of capital led to a new level of stability, and it resulted in stratifying the working class of Western countries. As skilled workers and craftsmen saw their wages increase, they became far less interested in solidarity with industrial workers who they deemed to be unskilled. English-speaking, U.S.-born and white workers in the United States banned foreign-born, non-English-speaking, and non-white workers from their labor unions. Most of the labor unions in the American Federation of Labor were openly racist, allowing only white workers to join. Lenin labeled this layer that emerged among the working class as the aristocracy of labor. It was made up of workers with higher pay who sympathized with the Western capitalists against lower-paid workers and people in the colonized world. As the labor federations and Marxist parties became dominated by the labor aristocrats, they became far less interested in revolution. They also became far more sympathetic to militarism and hostile to foreign nations. Essentially, a section of the working class was being unconsciously bought off and becoming loyal to the bankers and their governments. And later in the text, I talk about how the USA, killed millions of people in the Philippines, and how the British killed millions of people in India, and how the British killed millions of people in Africa, and the Belgians they slaughtered people in the Congo, and how China was kept in chronic poverty, and I talk about all of this, right? The thing is, BreadTube doesn't talk about any of that. They want to make Marxism just a conversation about pencil factories. They don't want to talk about big corporations dominating the world and keeping countries poor. They don't want to talk about banks and how they dominate the world and how banks don't have to see living standards rise. They can keep dominating the world by lending money and controlling the flow of credit. So they don't really need to see living standards go up. Industrial capitalists want people to buy their products, but bankers just keep lending money to people. That's all they need. The book is We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. And BreadTube just wants to talk about pencil factories. You know, the workers do not own these things that they make. The capitalist does. And they just want to have this endless conversation about factory floor exploitation in an age where factory labor is increasingly vanishing. I mean, we live in an economy where, you know, we got 3D printers and, you know, it's like, I mean, I don't know very many young people who've worked in a plant. Worked in a factory. I mean, there are some, but factories are increasingly not where people are working. It's the service sector more and more. But they want to keep it to a conversation about pencil factories. But it's worse than that. Not only do they not want to talk about imperialism and big banks dominating the global economy and whole countries being kept in chronic poverty and the aristocracy of labor and how, you know, imperialist super profits are used to buy off some of the workers at home and divide the working class. They don't want to talk about any of that. But it's worse than that. They don't just not want to talk about it. Okay, and this is what's very scary. If you talk about it, what does the BreadTube crowd say? They say, oh, that's a part of Marxism that we don't know enough about. Oh, maybe we ought to go read Lenin. No. Do they say, oh, you know, well, that's interesting. You might have a point there. No. Do they say, oh, you're right. Noam Chomsky has talked about this in his books. Audible. Noam Chomsky has talked about this in his books. And you know what? Naomi Klein has talked about it in her books on globalization. And wow, Arundhati Roy has talked about this. Yes, Western corporations and banks do dominate the world. Yes, no, they don't say that. If you bring this up, and I can show this to you, and makes me mad. It makes me mad, right? I'm trying to be all chipper here, but it makes me mad. Makes me mad. Makes me a madman. Makes me a madman. Makes me angry. If you bring up that the world is ruled by big banks and corporations who dominate the global economy and drive people into poverty, they say that you're anti-Semitic. Did you know that? That's their line. I can show you. Because I use the phrase international bankers, you're anti-Semitic. No, I mean, you're anti-Semitic. So Lenin must even though Lenin was himself Jewish, he must be anti-Semitic because Lenin wrote a whole book about this. Number one. Number two, they say you're a Trumper. I've seen this too. Well, Trump talks about, you know, jobs and protectionism and anti-globalism. So you must be a Trump supporter if you talk that way. If you're an anti-imperialist, you must be a Trump supporter. It's like, no. All right. Okay. IMF China concerns. You must be a Trump supporter. If you criticize the rule of multinational corporations, the way whole countries are kept in chronic poverty, you're an anti-Semite, you're an anti-globalist, you're part of the new right, you're a Trump supporter, you're a crypto-fascist. That's the way they talk. So basically, you're not allowed to be anti-imperialist. And this has nothing to do with Jews. Nothing to do with Jews. Right? Most Jewish people are not international bankers, and most international bankers are not Jewish, right? The IMF is full of people that are not Jewish. The World Bank is full of people that are not Jewish. Bank of America is full of people who are not Jewish. I mean, my goodness. And, I live in New York City, and there are millions of Jewish people here who don't work for international banks, have nothing to do with international banks. It said nothing to do, it's not anti-Semitism, right? BLM, riots, big corporations. It's not anti-Semitism. It's not anti-Semitism to talk about monopoly capitalism. It's not anti-Semitism to talk about imperialism and its monopoly stage. It has nothing to do with hating Jews. Nothing to do with hating Jews. It has nothing to do with hating Jews. How many times? But they have decided it has nothing to do with hating Jews. And the solution is not protectionism and just erect a bunch of tariffs. The solution is for the banks, factories, and industries to be organized to serve the people. It's for the means of production to be rationally controlled. Socialism is not when you and your friends start a pencil factory. It's cooperative. Socialism is when the banks and the factories and the major centers of economic power are forced to work in the interests of society overall. Socialism is eliminating profits in command. Socialism is when the economy is organized to serve public good and not profits. As Karl Marx said, socialism is when the state takes control of the major centers of economic power, right? It's when the means of production are taken under public ownership, right? It's when the people control the economy in order to make a better life for everyone. That's what socialism is. That's what it is. And around the world, every country that is basically anti-imperialist, if they get into a fight with the imperialists, they more or less have to become socialist, right? You know, they might start out trying to be middle of the road. Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, when he first got elected, he said he was neither a capitalist nor a socialist, but then the imperialists came down on him, he was forced to become a socialist, right? Anti-Semitism projection. Forced to become a socialist, right? Ba'athist Arab socialism, right? You can go down the line that socialism is the negation of imperialism. To fight the imperialists, you must become a socialist. And not surprisingly, the bread tube crowd don't recognize any of those countries as being socialist. For them, socialism is you keep this global system of monopoly capitalism intact, right? As Vosh said, everything is just the same as it is now, except every company is a worker cooperative. So we keep the global corporations and banks dominating the world. We keep, ultra-Western monopolies and corporations dominating the economies of developing countries. We keep it so countries all across the world don't have their own industries and don't have their own economy. But we just make sure that every Western person is a shareholder in the company that they work at. That's basically what it is. It's imperialism with profit sharing. That's what BreadTube wants. They want imperialism with profit sharing. You know that labor aristocracy thing? They basically just want to escalate that, right? And think about how much all the Boeing employees will be when the next war comes along, right? They all work for Boeing, right? And they make money from war. And right now a lot of the Boeing employees, they just get wages. But imagine if they were all shareholders. They'd be really lobbying Congress to go to war, right? Imagine how much we'd be locking people in jail and how enthusiastic the prisons for profit corporations would be if every guard was a shareholder. And the more people that got locked up, he saw his own pay go up. That's what these BreadTube people want. That's what they want. They don't want to dismantle profits in command, and they definitely don't want to dismantle the global system where Western banks and corporations dominate the world. They just want, the pencil factory to be owned by everybody, right? It's sick. They are not anti-imperialist, and if you're not anti-imperialist, you're not a socialist. Capitalism in our time is imperialism, and if you're not anti-imperialist, you're not anti-capitalist. And yes, there are forces around the world. There are capitalists who are anti-imperialist. That's true. There are capitalists who don't like competing with the big banks and corporations in the West. Lenin, imperialism, relevant. Change. There are anti-imperialist capitalists. There are anti-imperialist millionaires. There are anti-imperialist billionaires. That's true. And that breaking out of imperialism is always a good thing. Anything that stops the imperialists is a victory for the people of the world, and anything that strengthens imperialism is a setback for the people of the world. And the fact that BreadTube thinks they can talk about Marxism without talking about imperialism is shocking to me. Why do you think people are piling in on the U.S. border? Why do you think, Mexico, the people don't own their own farms? It's because of NAFTA. NAFTA enabled American agribusiness to just destroy the agricultural sector of Mexico. Now Mexico, a country that's been farming since long before Christopher Columbus ever came, is now having to import its food from American agribusiness. The USA has put the Mexican farm industry out of business. The Haitian people, right? The Haitian people who had their slave revolution and drove out the French and they had their own farms and all that. Well, the Haitians, now they are forced to import all of their food from the United States. The American agribusiness has put their agricultural sector out of business. There are Haitians now who eat dirt mixed with oil. It's very common in Haiti to have people eat dirt mixed with oil. That's what free trade imperialism has got, for the world. Honduras, go to Honduras. They don't have their own industries. They don't have their own economy. They're dominated by Western banks, and the place is infested with narco gangs, one of the highest murder rates in the world. You go to Guatemala, similar situation. Whole chunks of the country don't have running water and don't have electricity. But you go to Nicaragua, where the state, the socialist government of the Sandinistas, has been enabling Nicaraguans to start their own business with a micro-entrepreneurship program. The government controls the major industries. They have state direction of agriculture. They have their own industries. People are rising up from poverty. People are happy. And so, of course, what does U.S. media say about Nicaragua? It's a dictatorship. It's a dictatorship. You should go watch Ramiro Funes. He made a great documentary, Nicaragua Against Empire. Look at what they've achieved for the people there. It's a dictatorship. Meanwhile, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, Haiti, all these free market countries that have had free trade have just been crushed. That's capitalism in our time. And if you can't talk about it, if you just want to talk about hypothetical pencil factories all day, all you can bring yourself to talk about is hypothetical pencil factories and Joe the pencil maker, then you're not talking about imperialism. You're not talking about imperialism. If you can't talk about the fact that the highest life expectancy on the African continent used to be in Libya, because with socialism, they had broken out of imperialism, and Gaddafi was using the oil resources to build the world's biggest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River, to provide hospitals and schools and education for the population. And the USA blew Libya to shreds. Libya used to be the top oil exporting country in Africa. Now it's been blown to bits. You can't talk about that. You're not talking about capitalism. You're not really anti-capitalist. What's the top oil exporting country in our time today, in Africa these days? What is the top oil exporting country in Africa? Nigeria. Nigeria. And Nigeria is not Libya. Nigeria, now that Libya has been blown to bits, now Nigeria is the top oil exporting country. And Nigeria is a free market capitalist country. And all of Nigeria's oil resources, they're not run by a socialist government like they were in Libya. Nigeria's oil resources are run by ExxonMobil and BP and Shell Oil and Chevron. They control Nigeria's oil resources, not the African people themselves, not the Nigerians. Western bankers control them. And yes, bankers. I said bankers. And I didn't say Jews, and I'm not talking about Jews. I'm not an anti-Semite. I said bankers. ExxonMobil, the Rockefellers, not Jewish, so we're not doing that. ExxonMobil, which is Chase Bank, right? BP, British Petroleum, which is HSBC Bank, right? Shell Oil, Chevron. These corporations dominate Nigeria's oil. Nigeria is the top oil exporting country, and these big corporations dominate it. And in Nigeria, only 62% of the population can read. 38% of the people that are adults in Nigeria cannot read. All right? The life expectancy is under 70 years old. This is capitalism. How can a country like Nigeria, that is no country in all of Africa is producing as much oil as they are, how can there be so many Nigerians that are dirt poor? How is that possible? Because of imperialism, because of big banks and cartels and syndicates and all the stuff that I quote Lenin talking about in this book, because of imperialism. That's what BreadTube refuses to talk about. Because if you understand imperialism, eventually you're going to understand that Gaddafi is a good guy, and Ortega is a good guy, and the Iranians are good, and that Putin is good, and that China is good. If you talk about imperialism and you actually understand imperialism, you're going to know who the city builders are and who the vandals are. They don't want to have that conversation. And so because they won't talk about it, I mean, folks, why did 9 million people die of malnutrition this year? Because of the pandemic, 9 million people died from malnutrition during the pandemic. Why did this happen? Did this happen because Joe, the pencil factory owner, he doesn't get to keep the profits from his pencil, and this is hypothetical, and he's alien? No, this happened because of imperialism. Imperialism is about holding back economic development, grinding nations into poverty, keeping the world poor so that Wall Street bankers and billionaires can stay rich. This is what imperialism is. And this is what capitalism is in our time. And BreadTube's refusal to talk about it, they just don't go there. because they don't go there, they're not really anti-capitalist. This is capitalism, right? And they always want to throw a body count at communists. Communists killed blah, 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 million people. The body count of imperialism. Like I said, 9 million people this year died from malnutrition because of the pandemic, right? That's capitalism, 9 million people, right? In India, when the British were in control of India, when they were dominating India, there were famines with millions of deaths all the time. In China, before the Socialist Revolution, there were famines all the time where millions of people died because they didn't have proper food and education. The imperialists prevented China from having a central government so that when they had famines, they couldn't mobilize relief because they made sure the imperialists made sure they didn't have a central government to mobilize relief. In Ireland, there was a man-made famine, the potato famine, where, my ancestors came to the United States, and, you ever heard of the potato famine, right? That was, it was caused by the laissez-faire policies imposed on Ireland by the Whig Party and the land seizures, right? It wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a man-made famine the imperialists imposed on Ireland, right? I mean, go down the line. The imperialists, with imperialism, capitalism has killed millions and millions of people, and it's killing millions of people as we speak. There are whole sections of the world that the imperialists have not allowed to develop, have kept in chronic poverty. And then, on top of that, they try to tell us China's the bad guy because China goes to these countries and builds railroads, and China goes to these countries and builds power plants. Big ag, big oil. All right. Big ag, big oil, right? And that's the thing. And then they tell us China's bad because they build the power plants and they build the railroads and they build the hospitals and they build the schools. I mean, this is capitalism in our time. Capitalism in our time is imperialism. And if you're not anti-imperialist in our time, you're not really anti-capitalist. And it infuriates me that not only did the bread tube crowd not talk about it, not only do they not talk about it, but they say that you're a Nazi if you talk about it. Thank you, Andy. They say you're a fascist if you talk about it, right? I mean, it's like it's off limits to talk about this, right? And of course, the defining aspect of the time that we live in is the elimination of the labor aristocracy. That comfortable layer of the working class in the homeland, the aristocracy of labor, is being demolished right now. That's what's happening. The labor aristocracy, the high-paid middle class that kind of made the American society so functional during the Cold War, especially during the 50s, right? That white picket fence, that house, that car, they're eliminating it right now. They don't need an aristocracy of labor in the imperialist homeland. They don't need it anymore. So working class people who used to be living in places that were economically prosperous, like Motor City, Detroit, Motor City, or, Pittsburgh, Steel Town, or Cleveland, a lot of steel was made in Cleveland, or, the meat packing houses of Chicago, and all these places, there used to be a prosperous working class. Now that's being eliminated. And of course, those workers are angry about it. And they know who's eliminating their jobs. Huge multinational corporations, huge international banks, right? A global system of monopoly capitalism is creating a global race to the bottom, where workers all across the planet compete for who will accept the worst wages, the worst conditions, the lowest benefits. This is how the imperialists operate. They are at war with the workers at home, and they're using their global apparatus of production to drive down living standards at home. We are in a period of transition where they're demolishing the aristocracy of labor and driving the first world down to third world conditions, right? They don't need a prosperous domestic economy in the United States anymore. And the left won't talk about this, because if you talk about this, you're racist. You're Donald Trump. It's nuts. So of course Donald Trump is going to talk about this. Of course the right wing is going to talk about this, right? Of course they will. Of course the right wing is going to talk about this, because it's happening. It's happening, and working class people are angry about it. They're angry. I'm angry about what's happened to my hometown and the working people that I grew up around who had their jobs destroyed and the living standards. You know, I'm angry about what's happened to the people I went to high school with and how many of them have died from opioids, you know, or committed suicide. I'm angry about it, but they're not angry about it. You know, they're not angry about it. No, 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 no. It's not woke. It's not cool to be angry about it. And if you talk about huge multinational corporations and banks, you're a Nazi. And based on that, right, we're just supposed to, you know, imperialism, we're going to drive living standards down. We're going to degrow. Everyone's going to have to consume less. We're going to put up, you know, billboards. You know, we're going to take down billboards for cheap flights. We're going to tell working people who want to go to the Olympics in Japan that they're bad people because, you know, flights are bad. That's what we're going to do. Meanwhile, anyone who stands up and talks about the economic situation, then they just label you far right, crypto fascist, neo-Nazi, and then they roll ahead with it. They give imperialism a woke makeover, where suddenly the imperialists, even though they're the people that, you know, it's their system that built the slave ships, it's their system that killed the Native Americans, it's their system that backed the Confederacy. The Confederacy was about as globalist as you can get. They were tied in with the British Empire. Bet you didn't know that, but the British Empire backed the Confederacy because they wanted the cheap cotton to flow in, right? It was their system that has made the wars and the military-industrial complex. It's their system that's tied to all these crazy right-wing religious cults around the world, the Falun Gong, right, and the Moonies, and the Hare Krishnas, and all these crazy right-wing religious groups that are that people don't like, people on the left don't like. Their system created all of this, but now it's their system. It's the Western capitalist system that's woke, right? It's the Western capitalist system that's promoting human rights. It's the Western capitalist system that's anti-racist. And if you don't agree with their woke makeover of the world empire, if you don't agree with that, well, you're a Nazi, because the only opposition to them must be fascist. China, where the working people are coming together and they control the means of production and they've had unlimited growth, fascist, right? Nicaragua, where the indigenous people actually control huge chunks of the country, and they have like tribal sovereignty, and you have to get a passport to even go into the indigenous areas. Nazi, right? Venezuela, where they've done amazing things. They've wiped out illiteracy. Oh, Nazi. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? I mean, their system is the racist system. Their system is the imperialist system. Their system is all the things that they're now saving the world from are things they themselves created, and they're all things communists and Marxist-Leninists have actively fought against, but now they have a woke makeover. They're the woke CIA, and no one's allowed to agree with them. I reject this model. I reject it. Socialist president came to power, right? I reject this model. I reject it. I reject it. You can take your synthetic left and shove it up your you-know-what. Okay? You can take your Theodore Adorno and your Susan Sontag and stick it where the sun don't shine. I don't want it. I don't want it. I'm a Marxist. I'm a Leninist. I'm an anti-imperialist. I am an admirer of China. I am an admirer of Bolivarianism. I am an admirer of Ba'athist Arab socialism. I am an admirer of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I am a student of William Z. Foster and Gus Hall and Huey Newton and Harry Haywood and Paul Robeson and Nelson Peary. And you can take your woke imperialism and your pencil factories and you can shove it where. I don't want to hear it. I'm not part of your woke makeover for empire. I'm not interested in bombs that are decorated with rainbow flags and have BLM spray painted on them. I am not interested in it. I am an anti-imperialist. I am a Marxist. We're the people that invented anti-racism. We invented anti-racism. We invented the gay rights movement. Did you know that? Yeah, Google Harry Hay, right? Google Leslie Feinberg. Communists invented the gay rights movement. Right? We invented the gay rights movement. We invented anti-racism. Read about the Black Panthers. Read about the Scottsboro Nine. We invented anti-racism. Right? We invented feminism. Women got the right to vote in the Soviet Union before they got the right to vote in the United States. So don't give me a lecture about how I need to give up Marx, give up Lenin, need to give up the principles that are in this book and embrace your liberal arts, student debt, college, gender studies bullcrap. right? We invented this stuff. We invented this stuff. We wrote the books on this stuff. So I don't need your woke imperialism. I don't need your woke CIA advertisement. I don't need you to lecture me about pencil factories. I don't need you to your anarcho-syndicalism. I don't need your Trotskyism. I don't need none of it. Right? I am an anti-imperialist. I am a Marxist-Leninist. I am an anti-imperialist of the 21st century. I am moving toward developing, we as a group are moving toward developing a socialism for our time, a socialism with American characteristics, so we can get the working people of the United States to understand that Wall Street and London are not their friends, and Gaddafi and Nicaragua and Venezuela are not their enemies. We are going to say to working people that they're not going to regain their dignity by beating up immigrant workers and deporting them. They're not going to regain their dignity by intensifying the police state. That the answer is solidarity. It's solidarity. That's what we have to do, right? The revolution is not going to be made by woke hipster kids. Okay, it's going to be made by the working people of America who've been left behind. The people in the neighborhoods destroyed by opioids, the people in the neighborhoods that where people are hungry right now, the people who see their kids locked in jail. That's who's going to make the revolution. You are not, the rich college kids, the hipsters, the privileged, trendy left, the socialist trenders on the internet. They're not going to make the revolution. They are not going to make the revolution. We are getting lower and deeper to the masses. We are getting out of the movement and to the masses. You ought to read, Lenin wrote a very important essay called Imperialism and the Split in Socialism. You should read it, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism. It's a 10-page essay that Vladimir Lenin wrote about the social chauvinists, about the pro-imperialist elements, the aristocracy of labor, and how they dominated the socialist parties of his day. And he says it's the job of revolutionaries to get lower and deeper, to get out of the movement and get to the masses. Lenin himself said, lower and deeper, get out of the movement and get to the masses. That's what they said. That's what they said, and that's what needs to be done. That is what needs to be done in our time. Now, I'm going to write down these super chats. I'm going to make one final point, and then we're going to open up for our roll call and such. What were some of the criticisms leftists you have met in other countries? Okay, criticism leftists in other countries. All right. Lee Harvey Oswald. All right. Okay. I want to make one last point. Today, while I was working out at the gymnasium, I came up in my YouTube feed, and so I thought, why not watch it? I watched Tim Allen's address at Hillsdale College. Tim Allen, he does the, Home Improvement, and he's done a number of movies. He's a comedy actor, Tim Allen. And Tim Allen addressed Hillsdale College, which is this conservative right-wing college in Pennsylvania. And, I figured I should watch it. And I watched Tim Allen's 1 hour, speech. And he's a Trump supporter, and he makes analogies. Everything's communism. And, I listened to it, and it was politically quite bad in some ways. But what I thought was interesting about it is he spent a lot of time reflecting on his time in prison, which I thought was amusing. He talked about his time in prison. He talked about the good old days. And you listen to it, and it's like the conservative movement in the United States has never been this weak. Never has conservatism in the United States been as weak as it is right now. The right wing, the conservatives, they're weak. They're weak. I mean, it's just they're remembering the good old days, and they're telling jokes, and they're talking about their time in prison, and this is the weakness, right? Tucker Carlson can't even find enough right-wingers to go on his show. He's got to bring Max Blumenthal on to be anti-war, I mean, it's like they're at the point where they're weak. They're on the defensive. The right wing, the conservatives, are not the mainstream current of American imperialism. They're dying, right? They say the old gray mare, she ain't what she used to be. This is, the conservatism in the United States is in decline. But there's still a lot of people that don't want to accept the new liberal order. And so we have got to be the new opposition to imperialism, right? The right wing has no future. The right wing is looking to the past with nostalgia. They have no future. The future lies with real socialism. The future lies with anti-imperialism. The future lies with Marxism. The future lies with the banks, factories, and industries and the means of production being organized to serve the people, not the profits of a few. The future is technology. The future is rational economics. The future is central planning, and the future is optimism. And that's where it's at. Don't forget, folks, it is we who are the city builders. There's going to be an important web conference next weekend on Saturday. It's going to be an important Center for Political Innovation web conference. I hope you'll all tune in. My friend Dust James is going to be chairing. We're going to have remarks from Dan Kovalik, the writer, about his new book on cancel culture. We're going to have Dave Rovics, the musician, perform. And we're going to have speeches by Peter Coffin. It's going to be great stuff. It's going to be really, really great stuff. So I hope you tune in. The Center for Political Innovation is moving ahead. There are some great developments going on, some of which may distract me in the coming weeks, but we shall see. I just keep going. Folks, we're doing the best we can. The history is marching forward. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. All right. Names and locations. Brazil, Raphael. Justin Wooten in Beijing, China. Henderson, Nevada. Montreal. Ryan in Oakland, Los Angeles. Cleveland, Pirate Alex. Comrade Wu in Beijing, China. San Jose. Roll call. Branson, Missouri. Fairhope, Alabama. Tamara in Serbia. Harold in Youngstown, Ohio. Springfield, Missouri. Texas. Clydebank. Keaton Mansfield, good friend of the program, out in Illinois. Los Angeles, JT24 in Mississippi. Lawrence Chu, who is about to become a mod, right? Lawrence Chu in Albany, New York. Very good. Arturo in Anchorage, Alaska. Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. Welcome, Tamara and Dario. Welcome, welcome, welcome. From Hell, Jack the Ripper. Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, good friend of the program. Kinky and Joshua Tree. And I think Kinky can be a moderator as well. Elias in Wisconsin, West Virginia, 31st Century Socialism. I think you're going to be a mod as well. Just making everybody mods, right? Tucker Marks, John in Houston, Nazare Tedesco from Baldwin Park, California. Welcome. Colonized Aurora, West Palm Beach, Ramiro and Ophelia in East LA. Welcome, Ramiro and Ophelia. Zach, Dust James in North Carolina. Liverpool, UK, Vinicius in Brazil, Austin, Texas, West Palm Beach, Matthew in Australia, Pomona, California, West Palm Beach, New Jersey, Roscoe Dash, Bangkok, Thailand, Flushing, New York, Nashville, Tennessee, Gateshead, England. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Right? North Carolina, Asheville, Jared in Virginia, Holly Horn, Sweden, Stockholm, Andy Finaro. I think I'll make you a mod as well, Andy. West Palm Beach, Victorville, California, Cole in Calgary, Canada, Looking Angeles, I think it's Los Angeles, Lockport, New York, John Celeste, West Palm Beach, Santiago de Chile, Jenny Lynn, West Palm Beach, Travis Wade, New York City, Heavy Dukes, Australia, St. David's, Bermuda, Rockland County, New York, Kinky is a moderator, Toronto, Canada, Oakland, Old Gringo in Kansas City, Missouri, and Old Gringo is now a moderator. West Palm Beach, Travis Wade, the Black Hammer Compound, ha 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 ha. Australian in Chile, Tomasino, Minnesota, Adelaide, Australia, Drew in New Jersey, Virginia, Omaha, Nebraska, Richie out in Staten Island, Dylan Small in the Bay Area, who's now a moderator. Travis Wade, West Palm Beach, Kendall in San Diego, Melbourne, Australia, Dante from SoCal. Hey, fellow New Jersey peeps, says T. Chicago, Samuel Netton. Very good. Always good to be here with says Zach. Jared from the United Corporations of America. Jose from Sao Paulo, Brazil. There you go. Chinese state media fat-shamed Greta Thunberg. Yeah, I heard about that. What's the whole story there? Oh, Natalie K. in Baltimore. I thought I made you a mod. There we go. So there you go. All right. Dunkachino. We'll make him a mod as well. Okay. South Texas. Neon Concrete Wilderness. We need lots of mods, right? If people harass the chat, they can just delete them, right? Tucker Marks in Springfield. Carranza, Louisiana, roll call, very, very good. Anybody else? Names and locations before we jump into Fire 667 in Tennessee, very, very good. Nassau County, Char Darling in New York, very good. James Kane in Massachusetts, Duncachino, San Antonio, Texas. You get a mod, everyone gets a mod. Exactly, Natalie. All right, I am truly honored. Houston, G-Man in Minnesota, right? All right, Julian from Texas. Google is not a verb, California. Quite a few people from Texas. When you're in Texas, look behind you, because that's where Caleb's going to be. Right? You remember that? That was the theme song of Walker, Texas Ranger. That was something special. So there you go. All right. All right, folks. So, all right. So the first question we got here is New York City mayor's race. Why are they focusing on crime? Well, Solidarity said is going to be added as moderator, right? Why are they doing that? The thing is, the NYC mayor's race. If you've been to New York City lately, this city has just been demolished by the pandemic, and the crime rate has gone up astronomically. There was a 70% increase in shootings in this city last year, I believe. Robberies are increasing. Look, okay, so I never knew about any of this stuff until I moved to New York. People have filled me in having moved in here. So, but, I don't know. I guess to put this story in context, I'll explain. When my mom came to visit me in New York, for the first time, after I'd lived here for a few years, my mom came to visit me. She took the bus on in. She came up, we spent the day together, and, we walked around. And at one point, my mother looked up and she said, "Are we on 42nd Street?" And I said, yes, we are. And she said, "Oh my God, we should get out of here. This is where someone got robbed." And I said, "What?" Well, my mother had come on a school trip to New York City when she was a teenager in the 1960s. And somebody had been on 42nd Street and been robbed. Well, in the time that I lived in New York City, being robbed on 42nd Street, didn't happen, okay? But that's since the 90s, right? Liberal Zionism. Dead. All right. That's since the 90s. New York City used to be a lot more criminal. In the 90s, there was a big crackdown, and Rudy Giuliani came in. He quote unquote cleaned up New York, really just being vicious to homeless people, broken window policing. But the crime rate in the city went down. You didn't have people getting robbed at gunpoint on 42nd Street, right? And in the time I've lived in New York, I've been here for the last 10 years. The idea of somebody getting robbed on 42nd Street is something that just doesn't happen, right? And as bad as things are now, I haven't heard of anyone getting robbed on 42nd Street. But in the 1960s, it was not unheard of for someone to be walking down 42nd Street, especially at night, and someone to rob them at gunpoint, right? Things used to be pretty bad in New York City in terms of crime, right? In the late 80s and 90s, you had Rudy Giuliani, and they came in and they made the city a tourist kind of place, right? Right. And part of that, there was a huge crack, and part of that was the AIDS crisis, right? So, New York City, and two-party system in America. Part of that was the AIDS crisis, okay? So New York City, it's like the gay capital of New York City. San Francisco is also pretty gay, but New York City is also very gay. And, if you were gay, especially in times where there was a lot less acceptance of homosexuality, you didn't live in your little town in Tennessee or Indiana. You moved to New York City or San Francisco. And, the AIDS crisis hit, and people started getting HIV. There was HIV being spread. So, You know, a lot of people were dying of HIV. So there was a big crackdown on the gay bathhouses. You know, and that was a thing. There used to be these places, and I think there still are around the country, where gay men, you know, it's like supposed to be a bathhouse where you go and take a bath, but everybody knows it's a place that you're gay and you can just go hook up with random people. Well, Rudy Giuliani, people were very afraid of AIDS. They were worried about AIDS infection in the city. And Rudy Giuliani cracked down and he cleared out, you know, the bathhouses. And they would have like secret ones. You had to know somebody to get to, but they sent undercovers there and they cleared out the bathhouses. And it was appealing to homophobia, trying to link AIDS to gay people, which, I mean, you know, straight people can get AIDS just as easily, you know, I mean, it's, you know, but regardless, you know, there was a big crackdown on the gay community. There was a big crackdown on robberies, and, you know, they had you know, there was a big effort to make New York City, you know, tourist friendly. One thing, Times Square, for example, Times Square now, you know, Times Square, all the big lights and all that. Times Square used to be a prostitution hub. Everybody knew that. But if you wanted to hire a prostitute in New York City, you went to Times Square. And if you wanted to buy drugs in New York City, you went to Times Square. Well, not no more, right? I mean, the undercover police came in there and they made sure that was not the case, right? And they, you know, Rudy Giuliani, they say he Disneylanded New York City. He made New York City into, you know, he made New York City, you know, into a tourist kind of place. He cracked down on crime. He did a whole bunch of stuff, like, you know, it used to be homeless people slept on benches, right? They slept on the benches, right? And so they put up, you know, these, you know, if you go to the subway now, they have these like spaces on the benches to make sure you can't stretch out on the bench, you know, on the subway, stuff like that. They just, you know, drove homeless people out of the city, you know, had the police, you know, arrest people and like take them to jail for very petty crimes, you know, like jumping the subway turnstile and stuff like that. And the idea was to make the city, you know, the city more attractive to tourists, and that certainly reduced the amount of crime in the city, right? You know, I mean, the amount of robberies and the amount of, you know, and the other thing is, you know, and this is what people don't seem to get about this, right? Rudy Giuliani, I mean, he's Trump's lawyer and he's a Republican and all that, but a big part of what Rudy Giuliani did in New York City was gun control, right? Gun control. New York City has the strictest gun laws of any part of this country. You cannot have a gun in New York City at all. You cannot have, you know, a gun in New York City. And you can't have a hunting rifle unless you have a permit. Unless you're like an armed security guard and that's your job, or you're a cop, you can't have a gun here. And if you have it and they catch you with it, it's not a joke. Like, you go to jail for years. Like, they don't mess around. It's not like, oh, you have your gun. Well, sir, you can't have that. You need to, you know, get rid of that. Or no. They find that gun and you're gone. You know, see you in a couple years. You know, I mean, you're out of there, right? I mean, and not only do they have gun control here in New York City, they have stop and frisk, right? Now, they finally did get rid of it a couple years ago, but for a long time, they had this policy called stop and frisk, where the cops can, with no justifiable reason, stop you and search you for a gun, right? You can be walking down the street, you cannot break any law, they can have absolutely no reason to stop you, and they can be like, hey, you, stop, and search you for a gun. Now, that's completely unconstitutional. In the United States, in order to search somebody, you must have a search permit. But they say, oh, it's not a search, it's a frisk, meaning they don't look into your pockets, they don't look in your bag, they just, you know, feel you up to make sure you don't have a gun. Now, here's one thing I've always wondered, and the stop and frisk policy, I've lived in New York City for 10 years, never did I ever get frisked for a gun. At no point did any police officer ever search me for a firearm. I went Harlem, Bronx, I was living in Queens for a while, now I'm in Brooklyn, I took the subway every day. Never was I ever stopped and frisked. However, you know, African-American folks would get it almost every day. They'd be stopped, humiliated, the cop would pat them down. You know, there was the case of Ramarley Graham here in New York City. He was an African-American man, and they went to stop and frisk him, and he had a joint in his pocket. He had marijuana in his pocket, and he didn't want to get busted, so he ran away from them. So they chased him all the way to his apartment, and they burst into his apartment and bloom, and killed him just for running away from them. In the Bronx, you know, it was a murder. It was a police murder, you know, and it was just, it's this out of control policy. Now, shout out, one good thing that Dr. Cornel West and the Democratic Socialists of America and the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, they teamed up, and during Occupy Wall Street, they mobilized a lot of young people to get arrested in civil disobedience protests against stop and frisk. And that was pretty amazing. That was some really good action. I mean, Cornel West and the DSA and the RCP, that was a very good thing they did, right? And people got arrested in these civil disobediences against stop and frisk. It was a very, very good action that they did. But where was the National Rifle Association, the NRA, when it came to stop and frisk, right? They're always going, the Constitution, all these communists, you'll take my gun from my cold dead hand. There's a whole city. Not only are guns basically illegal in the city, but on top of that, in order to make sure nobody has a gun, the cops are walking up to random people and going, and stopping them, and if you run away, they might kill you. If the NRA, the National Rifle Association, was actually honest in what it believed, they would have been the first people. All of those gun nuts and rednecks from Alabama and Texas and all of them should have been piling into New York City to stand up, not just for the Second Amendment, but which is the one about search and seizure, the Seventh Amendment, or they should have been there. There's two constitutional amendments. They love the Constitution. They should have been there protesting stop and frisk, and they should have been there protesting against unlawful search and seizure. But they don't care because it was being done to black people. It was being done to black people. They don't care about black people, right? They're racist, right? In fact, their whole point, the NRA's whole thing is that you need a gun to protect yourself from black people, right? It's this racist appeal. You got to get a gun in your house because ethnic minorities are going to come rob you. They're racist, right? Everybody knows the NRA is racist, right? So, of course, they're not marching against stop and frisk. Are you kidding me? They're not going to march against stop and frisk. They're not going to march against gun control in New York City. They don't care, right? It's being used against people of color. It's being used against ethnic minorities, and they don't care about that, right? The fact that the NRA was completely silent about stop and frisk just kind of tells you what they're all about. But regardless, right? So, New York City, they have this, this very strict gun control kind of policy. Very strict gun control kind of policy, huge amounts of policing. So, New York City has been famous for a low crime rate, etc. It was Disneyfied. Rudy Giuliani cleaned up New York, all of this, right? So the thing now that you have to remember is that, so now the pandemic has driven all the rich people out of the city. All the rich people who come to New York City because they want to drink in hipster bars and they want to go to art gallery openings, they want to go to Broadway. They can't do that anymore. They can't go to raves, all the rich kid stuff, all the rich hipster, gentrified rich kid playground stuff, you can't do in this city. So all the rich people are out of here. They're just like, there's no point in them being here, right? And so, of course, the rent is dropping, property values are decreasing. Meanwhile, the rate of crime is going up. Okay, and this is, I'm sorry, but I saw somebody saying that's not the case. It wasn't the case until the pandemic, but since the pandemic, yes, there has been a very big increase in crime. Look, I did a stream a couple months ago about how there are prostitutes going from car to car in the subways now. I've seen that many times. There is public prostitution in the subway cars. That never would have happened 2 or 3 years ago, right? But there are women going from car to car, walking up to men and saying, me come home with you tonight? That would have been unheard of, in Rudy Giuliani's New York. But, that's happening. There's a lot more kind of homeless people walking around the streets, trying to get into fights with people. It's a lot scarier when I go to work nowadays. When I get on the subway here in Brooklyn, I get off the subway in Manhattan, and I work in central Manhattan, Midtown, which is, not a place that is low income by any means. It's, big office buildings and stuff. That's where I work. And the amount of homeless people I see, the amount of people I see fights, the city has really taken a beating. It's really taken a beating. And the mantra that we're hearing from the Republicans and from the NYPD, the mantra that we're hearing from the Republicans and the NYPD is that the old New York is coming back. 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 That's what they're saying, right? The old New York is coming back. So all the candidates here have to talk about it. That's, of course, it's going to be central. The thing is, as Natalie says, poverty has increased drastically, and that's the issue. People lost their jobs. They're hungry. They're desperate, right? I mean, I see people. There was one day I was out filming on the street. We're on terror. All right. One day I was out filming on the street, and this family walked up to me, and they were not begging, but they were just walking around. It's a mom and a dad and two kids, and they're just walking around, and you can tell they've been in a shelter, and they're just walking around. They see me filming my news story on the street, and they walk up to me, are you hiring now? Do you know someplace? It's so sad. It's so sad. It's so sad, right? I mean, it's gotten so bad in this city, right? I mean, the amount of homeless people I see, the amount of people that are desperate, the amount of like prostitution and stuff like that I see, right? Things have gotten bad. And so if you're running for mayor of New York City, I guess you have to address it. You can't not address it. You can't not address it, okay? It's just a reality. Catholic Charities in Queens, they have crowds and crowds of people that are desperate to get any help they can get. It's bad. It's very, very, very bad. Very, very, very bad. I mean, look at Broadway, right? How many people in New York City work on Broadway? No Broadway. There ain't no Broadway, right? Ain't no Broadway. And it's bad. And so of course, yes, they all have to address this, right? The NYPD is pro-Trump and is angry at the city administration, so they're playing up the idea that this is all because they've been, because of Black Lives Matter, because their budget has been decreased, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, the mayor candidates are all going to have to talk about this because it's the biggest fear, right? And that post-pandemic, they need those tourist dollars to start rolling back in again. They need people to start piling into the Broadway shows. They need those tourist dollars to return. If they don't do that, there you go. So there you go. All right. Okay, that was a long answer. Why do I always give long answers at the beginning? All right. Okay, so we're going to do some quick answers here. Ron Karenga versus the Black Panther Party. Manwala Karenga, or Ron Karenga, he's still living. He lives in Los Angeles, in South Central Los Angeles. He was the leader of a black nationalist group in LA called the United Slaves Organization. They were known as US, United Slaves. He was what you call a cultural nationalist. He drew from African history, and he believed in black capitalism, black small business owners, etc. The Black Panthers were Marxists, Marxist-Leninists, etc. So they didn't get along with each other. FBI sent fake letters to both groups, threatening each other, trying to stir the two groups up against each other. Eventually, members of the United Slaves went and murdered a few Black Panthers, and then after that, Ron Karenga invented Kwanzaa. So there you go. That's the story there. And it's now the FBI playing the United Slaves against the Black Panthers. It was an ugly thing, and this is COINTELPRO, play two very prominent black groups against each other, black revolutionary organizations. Ultimately it resulted in one group killing the other. Ron Karenga, he at one point, after I think he invented Kwanzaa as like the black nationalist alternative to Christmas, which is still celebrated. And then on top of that, Ron Karenga, at one point there were two women in his group, the United Slaves, that he believed were police spies that were spying on him. So he held them captive in his basement, and he gave them daily whippings with extension cords. Classic behavior. Just real upstanding kind of thing to do, right? You think someone's an informant, so you hold them captive in your home and you give them daily beatings. He was obviously arrested for this, and he did time for false imprisonment and kidnapping, and so he's got a record. But, I mean, he has a following. He's widely, not widely, but he has a following of people in Los Angeles that are black nationalists and respect him. And there are a lot of people in Los Angeles who hate his guts because he was an enemy of the Black Panthers. And that's about it. That's Ron Karenga versus the Black Panthers. Ron Karenga is a black nationalist, and, I don't know. And he invented Kwanzaa, and, he, not a particularly nice guy from what I understand, but, there you go. I mean, what more do you want me to say about that? The FBI played two black revolutionary groups against each other, and that's COINTELPRO. And no one has ever gone to jail for COINTELPRO. Nobody. right? They never jailed J. Edgar Hoover. They never jailed any of the FBI agents who sent those letters that resulted in people being killed. Never has there been any punishment for COINTELPRO. So on that basis, I maintain there needs to be a blanket amnesty for black liberation fighters in the United States. Mumia Abu-Jamal needs to be released. The Move 9 need to be released. All former members of the Black Liberation Army need to be released. The charges against Assata Shakur, who's in exile in Cuba, need to be dropped. Because they're not punishing the police for the horrendous atrocities they committed against the Black Liberation Movement. They're not punishing the FBI. There needs to be a blanket amnesty for black liberation fighters, right? The Puerto Rican fighters as well, the Weathermen, all of them, right? That's my position. I don't support left adventurism. I do not, right? I do not advocate left adventurist violence and terrorism. It's wrong. But I also think that the U.S. government, the way the U.S. government treated black revolutionaries who organized peacefully, was also wrong, and none of them went to jail. So there needs to be a prisoner exchange, basically. It needs to be just the war is over, truth and reconciliation, black political prisoners need to be released. End of discussion, right? Blanket amnesty. Blanket amnesty for black liberation fighters. That's my position. And also a blanket amnesty for Weather Underground people. Blanket amnesty. You let out David Gilbert, let him out. May 19th Communist Organization, people like that, let him out. You know what I mean? Look, the 1960s was a long time ago. We now know about MK Ultra. We now know about COINTELPRO. We know what these people were doing. We know what they were doing. That these people, they did a lot of illegal shit that I don't endorse. But at the same time, the U.S. government did all kinds of illegal shit that was far worse. So, these people were fighting against criminals, and criminals were fighting against them, and there needs to just be, we need to heal that wound. These people need to be brought home, right? H. Rap Brown, he needs to be returned. All of them, blanket amnesty. That's my position. The war is over. The 1960s was a long time ago. We now know what the U.S. government did. If I ever ran for president, Kinky, that would be in my platform. Blanket amnesty. Leonard Peltier needs to be released. He didn't kill those FBI agents. It was friendly fire. And the FBI had viciously gone after the Native American movement. So free Jamil Al-Amin, free Leonard Peltier, free Mumia Abu-Jamal, free David Gilbert, free, blanket amnesty. All of them. Move 9, all of them. Blanket amnesty for all political prisoners. That is my position. No endorsement of what they did, no endorsement of left adventurism, no endorsement of terrorism, blanket amnesty. That's my position. Take it or leave it. Alrighty. All right, Nord Stream 2. The fact that the USA is accepting Nord Stream 2, is that a sign of U.S. weakness? Looks like it to me. I mean, it looks like the USA did everything in its power to try and stop Nord Stream 2. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline, in which Russia is delivering, natural gas to Germany, it's going to happen. And the USA putting sanctions on it and trying to stop it is only hurting their relationship with Germany. So the USA needs to have a relationship with Germany. Germany's going to do this. They're not going to stop the United States from doing it. So, looks like it. All right. Chaya asked, why are there so many anti-communist conspiracy theories? Very good question, Chaya. Why are there so many anti-communist conspiracy theories? The reason for that, Chaya, is that the nature of conspiratorial logic, if you have no ideology, if you're simply a conspiracy theorist, you don't think the system is a problem. You think the problem is merely the conspiracy. Right? If you listen to Alex Jones' crowd, they love the Founding Fathers, they hate communism, they love American capitalism. There's nothing wrong with the system. Just the system has been taken over by the conspiracy. The Illuminati, or the reptile people, or the thing up on the thing, or the protocols, or the, whatever, the reptilians, or the Vatican, or whatever, has taken over, has secretly taken over great America. And now America and American capitalism and imperialism aren't great anymore. So if we just purge the conspiracy, everything will go back to being normal. So of course, communists who say the problem is actually the system, who say the problem is actually capitalism, well, they're going to be part of the big conspiracy, because clearly that can't be the case. conspiracy logic, right? Conspiracies do happen. There are conspiracies. There are conspiracies. Capitalists do conspire to do things, right? People do meet and plan to get things done. But the idea that, the underlying logic of most conspiracy theories is that there's nothing wrong with the system. And so because of that, they're going to think those who want to change the system are part of a conspiracy. In fact, the original conspiracy theory, right? It's funny because people that are, the common logic is people say that all conspiracy theories are the protocols of the elders of Zion. Though the protocols of the elders of Zion is actually it's much newer. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was an anti-Semitic book that was published by the Tsar of Russia to justify the pogroms, right? It was this book that was, that was published that claimed there was a Jewish conspiracy. I think it was like 1900, maybe 1910, around that time. The Tsarist government in Russia published this book claiming that Jews were responsible and that communism was a Jewish conspiracy, that Jews were responsible for all the world's problems, etc. And a lot of people say that's the original conspiracy theory. It's actually much newer than the Illuminati conspiracy theory. In Bavaria, and in the 1700s, in Bavaria, there was an anti-Catholic organization, a secret society of capitalists who didn't like the Catholic Church, and they were called the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati. And they were caught, and they were burned at the stake, I believe. They were all executed. But around the 1800s, in Europe, there started to be, the Catholic Church started spreading the idea that the Illuminati was much more widely, was still around, right? And that the French Revolution had been a conspiracy by the Illuminati, that communism was a conspiracy by the Illuminati, and that world events were a conspiracy by the Illuminati. Freemasonry. Right? Freemasonry emerged. Freemasonry tends to be Protestant. It's a Protestant tradition. Freemasonry emerged. The Catholic Church promoted the idea that Freemasonry was a continuation of the Illuminati, of the Bavarian Illuminati. So Illuminati conspiracy theories predate the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is not the original conspiracy theory. The original conspiracy theory is the Illuminati. Right, and we know the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church was the institution that existed to prop up feudalism. So capitalism, as it emerged, was kind of a threat to the Catholic Church, and that's the Protestant Reformation, began the origins of the capitalist, revolution, and that the Catholic Church was significantly weakened throughout the overturn of feudalism. So because of that, there were like vague criticisms of capitalism from a conservative perspective that you heard from the Catholic Church. And the notion that historical progress, like the French Revolution, like the Industrial Revolution, the overturning of feudalism, was all a big conspiracy. That was, the Catholic Church were the first to put that out, and they blamed it on the Bavarian Illuminati, and then eventually Freemasonry. And they were anti-Semitic. I mean, they did, persecute Jews and stuff. But it was in Tsarist Russia that you got the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But yeah, the problem with conspiratorial logic is it generally sees no problem with the system, and says that the system is fine. The problem is just the conspiracy. So if we just purge the conspiracy, then everything's fine. And so, of course, they're going to be anti-communist. That's what you have to understand. And that's why I would argue with people who read those books, because the conspiracy books, they lack ideology. This is why, I was on there just earlier. This is why ideology is important. It's why I get on here in my lives. I don't just talk about the news. I talk about ideology. Ideology is how you understand and interpret the world, right? And that ideology is really important. The problem isn't, the Illuminati or some secret conspiracy or something like that. The problem is the system. And there are conspirators within the system. And, there are many communists who are 9/11 truthers. There are many communists who question various events. Conspiracies happen. Capitalists do conspire. But the underlying problem is not just a bunch of evil conspirators. The problem is capitalism. All right. The idea that nobody wants to work. Look, there are plenty of people who want to work. I think they want to work. They want to be paid a decent wage for what they work. And the capitalists are used to paying not decent wages. I think that's the issue, right? Many people have pointed out that McDonald's, the amount that they're paying, people who start working at them and stuff is much higher. Good. right? The idea there's a labor shortage, good, right? Workers in the United States are paid so much less than workers in Europe, workers in other countries. Well, the fact that employers have to give people a higher wage, good, good, right? You know, I mean, I'm sorry, what employees are getting paid nowadays compared to, you know, what they make in other Western countries is ridiculous, right? No, I'm not angry that McDonald's in the Midwest has to pay people $13 an hour. I'm not angry about that. You know, I'm not angry that employers are having to pay more wages to get people to do stuff. I am not angry about that, right? I'm not, right? The fact that the employers are in a situation where they're having to dish out more wages, you know, who cares? Who cares, right? Employees, you know, deserve decent pay, right? Their labor is stolen from them, surplus value. So there you go. All right. Okay. China does not promote socialism outside of its own borders. Yep, they don't, right? I'm sorry. China has realized they need foreign investment. And they've also realized that the Communist International was not a good idea. Comintern was not a good idea, right? The Communist International, you can't have all the communist parties in the world, you know, all loyal to, you know, the Communist International. It was a disaster, right? And when the Communist International officially dissolved, Mao told the Chinese Communist Party that was a good thing. Because now the Chinese Communist Party, you know, the Chinese Communist Party hadn't even been listening to the Comintern since at least 1935. So, you know, missed super chat. Which super chat did I miss? I didn't see one go by here. So yeah, the idea that DPRK and USSR imposed travel restrictions. All right, okay, travel restrictions. DPRK, USSR. All right. And so, yeah, there you go. All right. Yeah, China, they're not spreading communism around the world. They are spreading economic development. They are building infrastructure. And those things lead to the working class becoming empowered. But no, China's not spreading communism around the world. And they shouldn't, right? At the end of the day, they shouldn't, right? Communists can show solidarity. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't have... Communists in the United States shouldn't be the satellites of China or Russia or Vietnam or Cuba or any socialist country. We should be socialists. We should be anti-imperialists, but we're not. We shouldn't be puppets of any socialist country. We have our own views. We have our own problems here, and the needs of states and the needs of socialist countries do not always align, right? And that, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's one thing. Socialist countries should have a relationship with communists in other countries, greet them, study each other, learn from each other. But, China shouldn't be spreading communism all over the world. We got to find our own path to the revolution. So there you go. All right. Vladimir Posner. He was like in the 80s, I believe Vladimir Posner was like a pro-Soviet commentator on American television, right? He was the guy they would bring on to give the Soviet perspective. And now he lives in Russia, and he's a TV host in Russia, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that much about him. I've watched some of his old clips from the 80s when he was in the United States. A Russian-American guy who had kind of a pro-Soviet perspective, and he would appear in American media, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that much about him. All right, cancel culture, when will it cancel itself? Yeah, exactly. It's a downward spiral. Everyone, the more you get into that stuff, pretty soon everyone has to be canceled. Everyone has to be canceled. No one is beyond scrutiny. Yeah, cancel culture. Yeah, it's just, and again, it makes people feel like they're doing activism, right? They can't really change anything. They feel like they can't really go out and get anything done, but they can castigate anybody on the internet who dares do it. One thing I remember, I'll never forget this. This was decades before people were talking about cancel culture or anything. This tells you everything you need to know. I was involved in a communist group, and I had this roommate who had been, but he just, he didn't want to be whatever. He wasn't as active. And so, the communist group I was involved in was having a demonstration for Trayvon Martin. You remember Trayvon Martin, African-American young man who was killed by like a vigilante in his neighborhood. Black Lives Matter, the hashtag originated. So there was a demonstration for Trayvon Martin. So I mentioned to my roommate, hey, I'm going to this demonstration for Trayvon Martin. The roommate's girlfriend was over. And she told me that, oh my God, you're white and you're going to a Trayvon Martin demonstration? That's appropriation. And she gave me this whole cancel culture speech about why I should not go to a demonstration for Trayvon Martin. And what was that about? What was that really about? Was that about, she just, no. Trayvon Martin's family wanted white people to go and demonstrate for Trayvon Martin. The communist group I was in, that was largely led by people of color, wanted people to go demonstrate for Trayvon Martin. But why did my roommate's girlfriend give me a speech about why, because I was white, I shouldn't go protest for Trayvon Martin? Why? Because she, she wasn't doing much activism, and she wanted to reassure herself that I wasn't better than her for doing it. And so I was racist and cultural appropriation, and as a white person, all these white people marching for Trayvon Martin, they've never been stopped and frisked, they don't know what it's like. And I'm just like, that's not what Trayvon Martin's family says, it's not what the black community is saying, but that's cancel culture. So she got to feel special because she could cancel me for going to the Trayvon Martin rally. Was she doing anything for Trayvon Martin? No. Was she doing anything to fight racism in the United States? No. No. You know what I mean? Nope. This tankyism, the original socialism. No, but she got to cancel me for doing it, so there you go, right? I mean, she wasn't sticking it to the capitalists, but she stuck it to me, right? So there you go. And that's a lot of times, that's what the cancelers are. They're people who've never done any activism in their life, never actually been part of a group, never, but they feel like if they can take down anyone who does, then that makes it all okay. That makes up for their lack of doing anything. And that's basically what a lot of the cancelers are, right? I mean, I call them left book losers for a reason, okay? That's not very nice. Maybe I shouldn't do that. But it's like the internet is full of people who think they're communists and think they're socialists. But all they do is attack other communists and other socialists all day long. Other communists and other socialists, and especially anyone who, God forbid, does anything. Anyone who organizes think tanks or has web streams of their own or writes books, God forbid, or is building a think tank. Anyone who actually does anything to promote socialism is, oh my God, it just drives them crazy. Why? Because it reminds them that, it makes them feel threatened, right? That there's a certain type of person, they become a communist because they're mad at the world, which, I mean, that's me. I was mad at the world when I was becoming a communist, right? We're all kind of mad at the world. They become a communist because they're mad at the world, and they never get beyond that. It's just kind of like they're mad at the world, and they're mad at the world. And being a communist means that they can be on their computer and be mad at the world. And that's all it means. It doesn't really mean more than that. I mean, being mad at the world and being on your computer, I mean, I'm on a computer right now. Actually, I'm on an iPhone, but you know what I mean. I am mad at the world in a lot of ways. But, we can be mad at the world. That's okay. And you can be on a computer. But it's like, if all communism ever means to you is being... another discussion with infrared. If all communism means to you is just being on your computer and being mad at the world, which when you're a teenager, it's a little bit different. You don't really have the opportunity because you're under your parents' dominion. But if you never aspire to do more than just be on the internet and be mad at the world, I don't know. That's the kind of person. And of course, they attack anyone who actually does, right? If you actually do something, you're reminding them of their own inadequacy and their own lack of activism and their own feelings of powerlessness. They're going to compare themselves to you and feel less than thou, which I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I'm not on here saying I'm better than anybody else. I'm not on here, there's a certain type of person that gets mad at you, right? I encounter this a lot where it's I'll know facts, right? Someone will ask me about a book I'm reading and I'll tell them about the book I'm reading. And then they'll get angry, oh, who do you think you are? You're knowing stuff. And it's if you feel inadequate, I'm not trying to make you feel inadequate. That is not my goal. I never said I was better than you. I don't think I'm better than you. I just happen to be reading this book. And if that makes you feel threatened, that ain't my fault, right? And it's a similar kind of thing, right? If you see somebody doing activism, like this woman saw that I was going to a demonstration for Trayvon Martin, that made her mad, right? On some level, she felt like I was better than her. Did I ever say to her, I am better than you because I'm going to this rally? Of course not. Never did. But, she felt on some level that me going to the demonstration for Trayvon Martin made myself better than her. So she needed to knock me down, by telling me it was racist. That's cancel culture. It's a way that people can justify their own inadequacies, feel better about themselves, rather than fighting capitalism, tear down somebody who used the wrong pronoun on the internet. And it's really sad. And it's not who you want to be. It's not who you want to be, right? If you are one of those people, I'm here to tell you, you can do better than that. I believe in you. You can do better than that. You can be better. You can be a socialist. You can be a revolutionary. You don't have to be a cancel culture. You don't have to be, all right. China, black, liberation. You don't have to be a cancel culture, right? You don't have to be a cancel culture, right? You don't have to be a canceller. You can be a real socialist. And that's my struggle. I want to make as many real socialists as I can. I'm starting the Center for Political Innovation to engage in education and group building activities. I want to make you a socialist. I want to make you a great revolutionary. I want you to be a hero. I want you to be heroic. I want to build you up. I don't want to tear you down. I don't want to beat you down and make you feel less than yourself. I want to build you up. I want to make you stronger. I want to make you more confident. I want to make you capable of doing better. I want you to understand Marxism as an ideology. I want to build you up. I don't want to tear you down. Real revolutionaries build people up and they don't tear people down. Real revolutionaries push other people forward. They don't hold other people back. Okay? Real revolutionary leaders, they pull great accomplishments out of people. People are pushed forward to do things they never knew they were capable of doing. That's what real revolutionary leaders do, right? They don't tear people down. They don't hold people back. They don't stop people from doing things. They do the exact opposite. All righty. All right. The USA borrowing from China. Yeah, right. I mean, China lending money to the United States is not something they want to do. It's something they're forced to do. And at any point, the United States could just not pay them back. And there would, that whole thing that we all owe money. All right, best books on failures of capitalism. Yeah, there you go. Okay, all right. Now, so I've said that the USSR required market reforms. What would it have looked like with those market reforms? Here's the thing: the USSR, so under Perestroika, they did implement market reforms, but the market reforms had the effect of tearing the country apart. As I've said many times, the Soviet Union didn't have the ability to bend, so it broke, right? And that the problems in the Soviet Union were not simply a lack of market reforms. It was that there was not a flexibility on the part of the ruling party. The ruling party was very rigid. There was not debate about how to move forward. All discussion and conflict was beneath the surface. People didn't really know where other people stood politically. The population was locked out of political discourse. The average person in the Soviet Union was not politically aware of what was going on. And as a result, the differences in the party, the alienation of the intellectuals, all got, and what Gorbachev did when he tried to fix the Soviet Union with Perestroika and Glasnost, instead of, helping the Soviet Union transition to be like China did, it was the opposite, right? Perestroika and Glasnost opened the floodgates and destroyed the Soviet Union, right? Thanks for recommending Reds. I can't believe I missed it in '81 when it premiered. So good. Thank you, Kinky. Well, it's a great movie. Reds, starring Warren Beatty, is one of my favorite movies. Subtly anti-communist, but it's sympathetic, right? So there you go. But yeah, that's the problem, is Perestroika and Glasnost. It was an attempt to move the Soviet Union in a direction that could fix it. It was market reforms. It was political opening, and it destroyed the place because all the underlying problems of the alienation of the intellectuals, of a chunk of the party not believing in communism anymore, of the population being depoliticized and locked out of politics, all of that came to the surface, and that dismantled the Soviet Union. All right, Lenin versus Rosa Luxemburg. The primary disagreement between Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg was the national question. Lenin said that it was the duty of communists to support the national liberation of oppressed nationalities. Right? Lenin called Russia the prison house of nations, and he supported people from oppressed nationalities like Ukrainians or Latvians or Lithuanians, or, he supported oppressed nationalities fighting for their national liberation, not as communists, but just as a nation, right? And he supported people in the colonized world, Africans and Asians and other people fighting against against the imperialists on the basis of their nationality. Rosa Luxemburg said that all nationalism is reactionary, And that was their principal disagreement. Rosa Luxemburg rejected nationalism. And, and Marx, or I'm sorry, and Lenin's breakthrough was that there is progressive nationalism among the colonized and oppressed peoples of the world. That's a difference. Anti-revisionist, anti-Dengists, Maoists in China. Right? That's the position. And that was their primary disagreement. But, the first speech of the first session of the Communist International, Lenin's first speech to the Comintern begins with a moment of silence in honor of Rosa Luxemburg. So, if Rosa Luxemburg had not died, she probably would have been at the first gathering of the Communist International. So, Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg were comrades. They disagreed on a lot of points, but they were very, very close. They were very, very close. All right. Why are my books not on Audible? Because at this point I don't have audio recordings of them. But some people are recording them. And if I could figure out how to get them on Audible, that'd be fine. I'm not opposed to having them on Audible. I'd love to have audio versions of my books out there. So if anyone knows how I can get my books on Audible, what the process is, please contact me. I'm not opposed to putting my books on Audible. Not opposed to it whatsoever. Maybe that's something that the CPI, as a group, we could figure out how to do, is get CPI books up on Audible. All right. The IMF expressing concerns about China. You want to talk about hypocrisy, right? I mean, the IMF traps countries around the world with debt, but then they go to China and say, oh, China loaning people money. Maybe they're possibly. I mean, it's such an extreme case of the pot calling the kettle black that it is really annoying. I didn't miss the Israel thing. It's on here. It's on here. Chill. All right. Okay. All right. So it's just an extreme case of the pot calling the kettle black. All right. Black Lives Matter riots and big corporations. Well, look, the issue of the police state is a big issue in the black community. It's been coming down on people in the black community for a long time. And, white people are feeling it too. I mean, there's a huge clamp down. The police state is coming down on everyone. At the same time, there's a lot of big corporations that want to join in and show that they're woke. And there's also Black Lives Matter Incorporated, which is different than, Black Lives Matter is a hashtag. Black Lives Matter Incorporated is George Soros. And from what I understand, it's staffed by a lot of former Teach for America teachers, actually. And it's a George Soros funded Ford Foundation activist institution that, is trying to control, the protests. And that there's a divide, okay? Like when I went to Ferguson, Missouri to do my documentary about the Ferguson Uprising, I heard black nationalist politics on the streets of Ferguson. I mean, Malik Zulu Shabazz was there, the Nation of Islam was there, and I heard very different politics from the people on the streets of Ferguson. Black Lives Matter is much more the woke, liberal line. But among the black community, black nationalism has a very deep root. There's a lot of black nationalism out there. And I think black nationalism tends to be much more anti-imperialist. So, there is an attempt to control an uprising that's going to happen anyway. The black community had enough of, the police state and racism and George Floyd and prisons for profit. The explosion was going to happen anyway. The question is, how do they direct it? Do they direct it in this IDPOL wokest way, or do black nationalist politics actually, take power, right? Does Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, and anti-imperialist forces that admire China and Russia and Iran, do they take the leadership? Or do wokest, college professors who say vote for Biden, do they take the leadership? And I think that there's a struggle for the political character of the uprising. That's my feeling. And that's been going on for a while. Alrighty. Lenin's imperialism, relevant changes. Well, as I said in my stream, what's going on now is they're demolishing the labor aristocracy at home. That's a big thing. They're demolishing the labor aristocracy at home, and increasingly imperialism is accumulating through destruction. That seems to be the main way they're accumulating now. It's like they don't go to countries and get their oil. They go to countries and blow them up so that then no one buys their oil from them. Libya, their oil exports are like 10% of what they were. Iraq, their oil exports are like 10% of what they were, right? It's the main way the imperialists operate is they're accumulating through destruction. They have they have basically turned destruction into a way of making profits, right? It used to be the capitalists made profits through some level of economic progress. If they weren't, it used to be that they were holding back development in the third world, but they were at least, having economic growth and progress in the first world. No, now they have developed all kinds of mechanisms through which to make profits from destruction. They destroy countries. They destroy living standards. They destroy people's lives in prison. They destroy, Donbass. All right. Donbass. They destroy people, right? I mean, we're in an era where I would argue that it's different than Lenin's time in that we're now in an era defined where imperialist politics and the domination of the world by Western banks is basically, it's focused on accumulating through destruction. All right. Big agribusiness and big oil. Well, yeah, American agribusiness is a huge, powerful thing. I mean, the USA exports, corn all over the world, and fructose corn syrup is in everything. And, the big agribusiness giants of the USA are ruthless, right? And that they want countries not to have their own agriculture and to be, desperate. After the fall of the Soviet Union, all the collective farms were put out of business, and they had to import all their food from the United States. There's been, there's similar efforts where they try to keep countries from growing their own farm products, and so they have to import from the United States. It's about maintaining a monopoly, and the U.S. government subsidizes the agriculture industry here a lot, so they're able to put out of business, folks. They're able to, undercut people in the international markets. You know about the Walmart scheme, right? Walmart, we know what they do is they go to a town. They lower their prices, they put all the other stores out of business, and once all the other stores are out of business, they raise their prices back up again. It's a Walmart scheme. Well, this is what American agribusiness does around the world. They go to a country, and with the subsidies of the American government, they then lower their prices. They start selling food way cheaper than the domestic farmers do. And then after all the domestic farmers are put out of business, and after they've bought up all the land, after that, then they raise their prices up. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Dugan, Donbass. All right. They raise their prices back up again. All right. That's what American agribusiness does. All right. Okay. How would a socialist president relate to the CIA? William Z. Foster, one of the things he points out is he said, if you elected a progressive government in the United States, it would be forced out of necessity to change the nature of the military, to change the nature of the police, to change the nature of the media and the educational system. If you had just a socialist president and he got in there, he would just be demolished unless he changed the nature of the state. And this is the point that Lenin makes in his book, The State and Revolution. And this is the point that, infuriating here, there's a quote from Marx where he says about the Paris Commune, they could not simply take hold of the ready-made state machinery. You have to build a new state. It's not that Marx wasn't in favor of any state. What Marx is saying is the Paris Commune showed you can't simply take hold of the ready-made state machinery. You have to build a new state. The police departments around this country were built to serve capitalism. So we're going to need to replace them with new socialist-oriented police departments. The U.S. military, the way they're trained is to serve imperialism. We're going to have socialism. We're going to have a whole new way of training the military. That same goes for the intelligence apparatus. The same goes for all of that. That the state, under capitalism, serves the existing order. So when you are building socialism, you can't just get elected and take control of the capitalist state and say, all right, we're going to do it socialist now. You have to change the nature of the state. You're going to have to change the nature of the police, to change the nature of the military. In Venezuela, they do this, right? Chavez got elected, but he changed the nature of the military. The military of Venezuela gets trained in Cuba. They go to Cuba for their military training. Did you know that? Right? They've got Bolivarian militias that are in neighborhoods and play the role of police. They have to change the nature of the state. And yes, a socialist leader in the United States, in order to stay in power, would have to change the nature of the state. It's that simple. Criticisms leftists in other countries have of the United States. Well, look, I will never forget being at the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013. We're having this meeting, and it's the Americans are meeting with the Cubans, right? And the Socialist Workers' Party, the militant, They're up there bragging about how many newspapers they sold. We have sold this many newspapers this week, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, and the Communist Party, one of their members is getting up and bragging about how she works at a gun control NGO in Connecticut, and she's going to get guns outlawed. And, you know, our group, we're bragging about protests that we had. And the Cuban guy gets up and he says, okay, he said, we've been hearing this crap for years from you guys, from you Americans. Right? And he's like, you guys need to build a sustainable movement with a base among the population. We're sick of hearing this. You sell your newspapers, you're lobbying Democrats, you're having little rallies. And he's like, you need to build a base among the population. And he's like, we've been hearing you guys talk this way for years. We got the scolding of our lives from a Cuban communist. This Cuban communist guy, who was not old, mind you. He was a young guy. He was in his 20s. He ripped us a new one. I mean, he just ripped us a new one. I mean, he spanked us harder than we ever been spanked before. I mean, it was something special. To sit there, the Cuban guy just ripped us a new one. And he was right. I mean, look, and he said, look, I've been hearing the same thing from American communists for years. You guys, you need to do what communists in other countries do, which is build a base among the population. You need to have, you guys aren't doing that. And he was right. And he was absolutely right. And I listened and I heard the exact same thing from communists from Vietnam. And I heard the exact same thing from communists from all over the world. You guys are not building a base among the population. You're doing the same thing. You're making the same mistakes over and over and over again. You have the same failed strategies that are not working. There are millions of Americans who have never encountered you guys and never heard what you had to say. Get your shit together. And he was right. He was right. He wasn't particularly nasty about it. He was polite, but he said, look, I don't want to hear about how many newspapers you sold. I don't want to hear about how, the NGO you're working with in Connecticut to outlaw guns. Don't want to hear about your little protest rallies around the latest trendy liberal cause. What I want to hear you talk about is how you're building a base among the population. Right? At the end of the day, any other part of the world you go to a big city, they'll tell you where the communist neighborhood is. You gotta go to Paris, everybody knows which is the communist neighborhood. You go to London, you go to Germany, you go to Brazil, you go to Argentina, you go to Chile. Everybody knows where the communist neighborhood is. United States, where's the communist neighborhood? There isn't one. Well, that's a bit of a problem now, isn't it? Right? A little bit of a problem. Build a base among the population. That's the biggest criticism I've ever heard. Build a base among the population. All right. Lee Harvey Oswald. Look, Lee Harvey Oswald is a sketch character, okay? And good communists can disagree about this. I don't think Lee Harvey Oswald was really a communist. I think he was a psychologically unhealthy person, but he was in the U.S. military. And one day he just, he's in West Germany and the military, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to defect. I'm going to walk over the border and go to East Germany. Oh, okay. So he does. Right? And he's in East Germany, and he gets to Moscow, finally. He gets to Moscow, and he says, I really want to live in Moscow. I really want to live in the Soviet Union. The Soviets are like, no, you can't do that. So he goes back to his hotel, and he tries to commit suicide. Slits his wrists. They stop him. They say, oh, wow, okay, you really want to live here? You're going to kill yourself? All right, fine. They send him to Ukraine, and he works in a tractor factory for a couple years in Ukraine. After about 2 years working in the tractor factory, he's like, I'll go home now, right? His marriage fell apart. He had a wife, and it didn't work out. So he goes back to the United States. Now, generally, if you're in the military and you, walk over the border and, disappear for 2 years and are hanging out living in the Soviet Union, generally, when you get back, there's, some consequences. You're in a little bit of trouble, right? Most jobs you can't just walk away from for 2 years. And the U.S. military is a little stricter than most jobs. So he gets back to the United States, and you'd think he goes to prison or nothing. Nothing. That's a little sketch. That's a little bit sketch. Watch his interview. He did an interview, when he was in New Orleans. He's handing out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Watch the interview he does with local TV, and they interview him, and he's like, they say, are you a communist? He's like, no, I am not a communist. I am a Marxist. And it's the weirdest answer. He gives this incoherent answer to the question, are you a communist? Yeah, I don't know. I think that he was a mentally ill person who was used. I think he was used. I think that there were more powerful forces that saw him as useful. I think some people report that he said at one point, "quote I'm a patsy." So there you go. Yeah, there you go. I mean, I just, yeah, I don't buy that he was just a legit communist who became a left adventurist. No, I don't think that's the case. I think there was something else going on there. That's my opinion. All right. There you go. Someone said liberal Zionism is dead. It certainly seems that way. Chris Morlock said something nasty about Vosh, which he deserves. All right. Liberal Zionism is dead. When Israel started, it wanted people to think it was a big socialist commune in the desert. It had kibbutzim, and it was progressive, and the Soviet Union supported it. 1978, the election of Itzhak, or Menachem Begin. The election of Menachem Begin as leader of Israel in 1978 was a big turning point for the right wing in Israel, Netanyahu and all of that. And at this point, Israel's on the right? Israel started out, it's been a long process, but Israel has gone from selling itself to the left to selling itself to the right. So there you go. When Israel was starting, Henry Wallace, who I admire in many ways, he had protests against Harry Truman about Israel, but they weren't protests that Harry Truman was like creating Israel and, creating genocide against the Palestinians. It was the opposite. Harry Truman wasn't doing enough to support Israel. And the Communist Party were enthusiastic supporters of Israel when it started. There was a whole big parade in New York City to celebrate the creation of Israel, and the people that were on the board of it, that did the parade, were Communist Party USA members. Interestingly, the Trotskyites were anti-Israel. This is one of the weird instances where the Trotskyites were actually right. They were against Israel. And the communists were wrong. The Communist Party USA was wrong. It's a weird moment where William Z. Foster, the Communist Party USA, they had it in their minds that the Soviet Union would benefit from the creation of Israel, which it did not. It absolutely did not. They had it in their minds that Israel was going to become a progressive country. They had it in their minds that because so many Jewish people were leftists and communists, Israel wouldn't be genocidal and it wouldn't be a settler country, which it is. They were just completely wrong on that. William Z. Foster, Gus Hall, they were wrong. And the Trots, they didn't come out swinging, but they took the right position, which is that we don't support Zionism. This will be an outpost of Western colonialism. The Trotskyites were right. They were right. The Trotskyites were right on Israel, and the communists were wrong. Now, the Soviet Union turned against Israel pretty quick. Like in 1 or 2 years, they were arresting Israeli spies and executing them, and Israel was spying on them, and they considered Israel their enemy. But the U.S. Communist Party didn't break with Israel until 1967, which is big. The U.S. Communist Party was more pro-Israel than most communist parties in the world. So there you go. But in 1967, they did break with Israel, ultimately. They supported the Arab nationalist states in the 1967 war, and that was correct. That was the right thing to do. And it was hard, right? 1967, there was a huge mobilization of the public to support Israel in the 1967 war. Well, there you go. Another interesting tidbit is Hank Greenspun. There's an individual in Las Vegas, Nevada, named Hank Greenspun. He was a newspaper owner. And he was Joe McCarthy's biggest enemy. He's the one who broke the story that Joe McCarthy was gay, and reported that Joe McCarthy was gay. And he was an enemy of Joe McCarthy. He's credited as like being the biggest enemy of Joe McCarthy in American media. Hank Greenspun. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Whatever. But anyway. Hank Greenspun. Hank Greenspun, not only was he, a big enemy of McCarthyism, but Hank Greenspun also stole a huge amount of U.S. military hardware from the U.S. Army and gave it to Israel. And you can read about Hank Greenspun. He was convicted of stealing lots of U.S. military hardware and giving it to the Israeli government, And you can read about this, and he was given like a light sentence. He stole like millions of dollars worth of U.S. military hardware, and then he was convicted of it, and he got like a really light sentence. And then it was John F. Kennedy who pardoned him. But you can read about that. But he was also Joe McCarthy's biggest enemy, and he's the guy who broke the story that McCarthy was gay. So that's interesting. So, all right. So, and the two-party system in America, I don't know. I mean, it may be one of the two parties has to split. That's really, you want to break the two-party system in America, one of the two parties has to have a solid split, basically. Unless one of the two parties has a solid split, the Republican Party was a third party, but it was a split from the Whig Party, right? And if you want to have a serious third party in the United States, you need one of the major parties has to crack. It has to split. All right. The War on Terror. Yeah, the opening of the War on Terror, the rhetoric from liberals was abominable. It was abominable, right? Osama bin Laden was not Ho Chi Minh. Osama bin Laden was not Saddam Hussein. And Osama bin Laden was not an anti-imperialist. And the way the left talked about 9/11, I was there right after 9/11, right? The way that Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn and Ward Churchill talked about 9/11, the narrative was this. America has gone around the world and done all these horrendous, evil things and killed all these innocent people. And now someone's come back and done to us what we've done to people around the world. And now is the time for moral reflection and peace and blah, blah, blah. The people who attacked us on 9/11 were not the anti-imperialists. We were not attacked by anti-imperialists on 9/11. It's true that America has gone around the world and killed lots of innocent people. And the way we've done it is we've armed and trained these crazy extremists like Osama bin Laden. And it just so happens that, these crazy extremists who may have had some help, attacked us. And that should be a moment to talk about why maybe we shouldn't be arming and training crazy extremists. But the notion, Yuri Kochiyama, who I like in a lot of ways, and she was a great Asian American activist. She was old, and she gave an interview where she compared Osama bin Laden to like Malcolm X, and it was nuts, right? And that the American people didn't want to hear that. They were mourning. I mean, we're shocked. One of our big buildings is blown up, and the Pentagon and the whole country is feeling like we're under attack. And then the left goes up to people and says, "Oh, well, we deserve it. We've done worse to other people." Right? That's not a winning message, right? And all the anti-imperialists were on board with the War on Terror. Cuba, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Russia, China, they were all ready. They said, yes, we've been dealing with Osama bin Laden types for years. We've been dealing with these people for years. Gaddafi couldn't stand Al-Qaeda. China couldn't stand Al-Qaeda. Cuba, hates those people, right? The Soviet Union fought against those people. All the anti-imperialists were like, finally, America gets that the Al-Qaeda people they support are not good. And so the whole anti-imperialist world was like, wow, now America, you get why we don't like your policy of arming Wahhabis. And for like a brief moment, but of course the United States didn't do that. And the United States attacked Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11, and it let the Saudis keep being the Saudis. So the policy didn't change. But there should have been education at that point. And instead, U.S. media made it seem like Osama bin Laden was an anti-imperialist, which he wasn't. And the left bought that, and they bought it, and they said, "Yep, see, and Osama bin Laden was not an anti-imperialist. Period." All right, travel restrictions in the DPRK and the USSR. How might anti-imperialism enter the mainstream? Enter mainstream. I'm starting to fade, folks, so we're gonna have to just bang these out here. Okay. All right. Travel restrictions. Well, look, socialist countries don't want brain drain. They don't want, they spend lots, they're blockaded. They have sanctions on them. They spend lots of money to educate their people. And then a lot of these people, like this happens in Cuba. Cuba spends a lot of its money to educate its people to be doctors. And then these doctors defect to the United States. And with their medical degree, they start making lots more money in the United States. And then they talk smack about Cuba, and none of the money goes to Cuba. So yeah, the socialist countries will restrict travel, because they don't, it's average people, don't want to leave. The people who want to leave tend to be the ones that are the ones that have education. And that costs the socialist countries money, and it's like, yeah, they've invested in these folks, they've invested in their population, and then the West scoops them out. It's called brain drain. And it's a problem. And it's brain drain is the main reason here in the United States that we don't have a good educational system. Well, that's okay. We can just, steal all the smart people from the other countries. And, yeah, it's a big problem. And, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with the travel restrictions, but I'm telling you why they're there. That there's a huge effort to strip developing countries, not just anti-imperialist ones, but all developing countries, of their intellectuals. And it's not good. That's the one way they chose to deal with it. Is tankyism the original socialism? Well, tankyism refers to people that support existing socialist countries. At the time that, socialism is a vague concept, has been around for a long time. Marxism is it goes back to 1848. I guess tankyism is supporting the existing socialist states. So, I don't know what you mean by the original socialism, but yes, I think that tankyism is in line with what Frederick Engels wrote in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. It's in line with the Communist Manifesto for the most part. But, is it the original socialism? The word socialism was originally invented by Henry Saint-Simon, who was a utopian. So, is that the original socialism? I don't know, but, you can go back to, at the time of King Henry VIII, you had Sir Thomas More, who wrote a book called Utopia that was about, like, peasant cooperatives being formed or something. Was that, is that the original socialism? So, yeah. Would I talk to Infrared again? Sure, I would love to talk to him again. Yes, the answer is yes. Yes, sir, I would talk to Mr. Infrared. I would do it. All right, next question. Why does China not support the black liberation struggle like it does in the 1960s? Well, China criticizes the USA for police brutality and discrimination and racism all the time. All the time it criticizes the United States. Yeah, China's not spreading global communism around the world. But are they supportive of human rights and criticizing the U.S. government for the way it treats black people? Absolutely they are. All righty. Best books on the failures of capitalism. All right. I'll give you a list of books. The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. That's one. Low Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein. Labor and Monopoly Capital by Harvey Braverman. What else? Labor and Monopoly Capital, Harvey Braverman. Europe Since 1989 by Philip Thayer. What else? Well, obviously there's We Are City Builders and City Builders and Vandals in Our Age by me. There's plenty. There's great stuff. There's great stuff out there. Michael Parenti, right? Michael Parenti, what has he got? Super Patriotism, that's a good book by Michael Parenti. Democracy for the Few by Michael Parenti, that's also very good. It's like a textbook he wrote. What else? You just want me to list off books on the failures of capitalism. What else? Contrary Notions by Michael Parenti, Against Empire by Michael Parenti. There you go. High Tech Low Pay by Sam Marcy. Imperialism, Decadent, Moribund Capitalism by Harpal Brar. That's very good. Right. What else? I'm just listing off books here. Right. What else? Trying to think of a few more. Just books on the failure of capitalism. You want to read about the prison industrial complex. You could read The New Jim Crow. That's about, prisons for profit. There are many, many such books. I wish my bookshelf was in front of me. I'd just start naming some of them off for you. But The History of Neoliberalism by David Harvey. There's a good book on the history of austerity that I would recommend. I can't remember that. It's called Austerity: The History of a Dangerous Idea. I learned a lot from that book. Absolutely. single most effective thing. All right. Single most effective thing. Alrighty. I think I've listed off a number of books there. All right. Anti-revisionists and anti-Dengists in China. Well, look, that's a huge oversimplification. China is a huge country, much bigger in terms of population than the United States. And the spectrum of public opinion in China is massive. And you have to understand, communism is the ruling ideology in China, right? Everyone in China in school learns about communism in their school, and they take classes on communism. Mao is the founder of the country. He's like the George Washington, and thank you, Edward. So, are there people in China who feel that, who have views that are significantly to the left of the Chinese Communist Party? Yes. Are there people that want the Chinese Communist Party to move in a more Mao era direction? Yes. That is a huge category, and some are in the party and and some are outside of the party, and some are kind of in the party and kind of outside of the party. And it's a huge, that what you're describing there's a huge category of people, that there's a huge spectrum, right? And some of those people are dupes of imperialism, right? Are just, are being utilized as kind of useful idiots to destabilize the country. And some of those people are the most fervent anti-imperialists that exist, in China, and the most fervent supporters of the government and anti-imperialism. And so, that category you listed there, people that might be more critical or think that, that the China's revisionist or not communist enough, that's such a huge category. It's, again, China is a huge country. And so it's there you go. All right. This is the situation in Donbass. Well, the peoples of the Donbass, right? Oh my God. All right. That was horrifying. All righty. Anyway, that was utterly horrifying. That's like a horror movie. Yeah. But anyway, anyhow, the peoples of the Donbass, the peoples of the Donbass, right? Those are Russian-speaking eastern regions of Russia. After the 2014 coup, when the Barack Obama and the the USA backed the government of the government of Ukraine being overthrown, they put in the right-wing ultra-nationalist government in Kiev that was talking about outlawing the teaching of the Russian language in schools, and has a very different historical narrative, has torn down World War II monuments. People in the eastern regions of Ukraine voted to break away, and they formed the People's Republic of Donetsk, the People's Republic of Luhansk, the People's Republic of Donbass. Novorossiya is what they refer to themselves as. And the Ukrainian government has been hostile to them, and it has been very oppressive. And I mean, they're blockaded, and yeah, I don't know what more to say about it. That they suffer from the there you go. There you go. Alrighty. Okay, and as far as Dugin's influence in Donbass, I don't know about it. I just don't know about it. About the influence of Alexander Dugin in Donbass. I've never been to the Donbass. I don't know. I've been to Crimea, but Crimea is no longer part of Ukraine. It's part of Russia. I've been to Yalta, to the Yalta Economic Forum. I don't know about how influential Dugin and fourth political theory and stuff like that is in Donbass. I just don't know. How can anti-imperialism enter the mainstream? Again, you have to build a base among the population. Right? There's a lot of anti-imperialist sentiment in the black community, and that's because black nationalists, for decades and decades and decades, have built a base among the population. In Nation of Islam and all of that, there's a lot of support for them, right? And what's the single most effective thing that you can do to get to socialism in the United States? Get involved with the Center for Political Innovation and engage in education so that we can get out of the movement and get to the masses. If you want to help build socialism in the United States, get involved with the CPI. Help us build an educational think tank that spreads socialist ideas across America. Get to the masses. Get to the masses. Get out of the movement and get to the masses. So there you go. Folks, I am fading. We've been on here well over 2 hours. Thank you for your patience, but I have run out of gas and I've answered all the super chats. So I'm going to end it right now. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. And I'll be back tomorrow night. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.